The Deep Run Tram is my favourite place in World of Warcraft, and this isn't the first nor the last time it will be brought up on this channel. I like it so much not because I like spending time here, it's dark and dingy and noisy and nowadays mostly empty, but I like it because of what it represents. The tram and transport like it are what this video is about, or was about, before its scope crept further and further. It didn't quite feel right to talk about the Deep Run Tram without also mentioning the game's ferries and zeppelins, and it didn't quite feel right to talk about them without also talking about their balance alongside other forms of travel in this game. And at that point, it didn't feel right to talk about World of Warcraft in a bubble, and so this project expanded into many other MMOs. And yeah, this is the main reason I've not uploaded in a while. So, in this video I'll be taking a look at a diverse and slightly strange collection of MMORPGs, exploring their travel, sharing thoughts about their design, and then at the end circle back around to World of Warcraft, and come to some conclusions about it all. I hope you like it. EverQuest launched in March of 1999, and so I've never played it. It's before my time. But I don't think you can have a proper conversation about MMO game design without talking about it. Now, other MMOs did come first. There's Ultima Online, which launched in 1997, and even before then there are the multi-user dungeons or MUDs that people were playing for years beforehand, which form the basis of the MMORPG. But a very significant amount of modern MMO design is largely derived from World of Warcraft. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of World of Warcraft was derived from EverQuest. Most ideas implemented into MMOs today likely saw their genesis in EverQuest. It's the root of the genre as most people know it. As I just said, I've not played the game, but I've watched quite a bit of it online over the years, and I've interviewed a couple of people from the community. Their names will be up on the screen now. Thank you again, by the way. And though I knew it would be an interesting game to cover, there's so many little details that I'd never even thought of, especially when it comes to travel in this game, because travel in EverQuest is unmatched. Now, with all of the other games you'll see in the later parts of this video, at its base level, travel is done by just walking around. Each race starts in its completely separate area far away from the others, and so if you want to link up with your friends or just other people playing the game, you need to do some exploring and figure out where people are coming from. Now, this is very normal today, it's not really something that you would point out as unique, but back in 1999, it was. This game pioneered the idea of having to link up with other players throughout the world, instead of just everyone starting in one place. Another thing to add, or well, take away from the exploration factor, is that there is no map. Now, later on, there were these line maps, and I think most people that play EverQuest today will download some kind of map pack to use, but when the game released, in the late 90s, there were no maps at all. In this world, you have to navigate through landmarks and knowing which zone you're in and how it connects to the other zones around it. You'll have to keep tabs on how far away from home you are or how close you are to the nearest safe area. And of course, you could get lost. I mean, let's stop and consider this. Post World of Warcraft, pretty much all MMOs, or well, all open world games will have a world map where you can track where you are in real time. You can see exactly where you are in relation to nearby areas and where those areas are in relation to other areas. It's never even an idea that you'd get lost. Over your time in EverQuest, you'll slowly learn the road networks and the landmarks to know that you're just north of this area or just shy of over there. And this method of using landmarks is something that the level designers can use to great effect to establish where you are, or something that they can take away to get you lost. I think on paper, if you've only played games with world maps, you're probably a bit skeptical of how well this actually works. As I said earlier, I've not played EverQuest myself, but I have spent a fair bit of time with its spiritual successor, Monsters and Memories, which should be releasing this year, by the way, into early access. And I can confirm that that kind of design does work. If the world is properly set up with landmarks and ways for you to align yourself with north, you can get by just fine without a map. And the subtle psychological effect it has on you exploring the world is really unique, and I think something that games like World of Warcraft are missing. Another factor to exploration is the day and night cycle. Now, if you've played World of Warcraft, you probably remember Shadowfang Keep. There's a village next to it, I think it's called Pirewood. It has a really unique feature where at night time, all of the villagers become werewolves and will attack you. Though if you go during the daytime, and I think if you're Alliance, you can walk in just fine and use their vendors. I've always thought that this was an amazing feature to have an area be completely different depending on the time of day, and always been a bit disappointed that it just wasn't ever used again as a mechanic. I don't think there is another usage of the day-night cycle. I could be wrong though. But a great example in EverQuest is in the Kithakor Forest. During EverQuest's first year, the Plane of Hate endgame instance opened, and with it, a couple of other changes as well. One of them was that in Kithakor Forest at nighttime, the place turns into a nightmare zone. By day, from my understanding, it's a pretty normal, lower level leveling zone. It's easy to get lost in there, there's lots of mobs to kill, it's quite standard, but at nighttime it is filled with incredibly high level monsters. So not only can low level players get lost in the forest, but if you get lost for too long and it turns to nighttime, you're screwed. Now, I'm sure some MMOs have done something like this over the years, but I can't think of it. All I can think of that's similar to this is Minecraft. A part of the game adjacent to the day and night cycle is light and dark. Now, different races in the game can perceive darkness differently. Your average so-called normal races, like let's say humans, can't see in the dark very well, like real humans can't, and so we need to bring a light source into a lot of caves and dungeons, whereas some other races, I think like dwarves and dark elves and the like, are used to living underground and so can see just fine. So as well as the day-night cycle and your personal knowledge of the map, your night vision also comes into play into how you navigate the world and which routes you'll take, or maybe encourage you to get into a group where someone who can see in the dark much better than you can lead the way. Now, there is no alliance or horde, but you can see the origins of that system. There are so-called good and evil races. Your traditional fantasy races, like let's say humans, dwarves, halflings, elves, they're your typical good races, but then you've got dark elves, ogres, stuff like that. And the fact that they are evil is completely recognized by the game world. From my understanding, in the base game, the main city is Freeport. It's this huge area with multiple districts, but if an evil race tries to walk in through the city gates, they'll just be killed on sight. In fact, any guards will kill them on sight. To get into Freeport, they actually need to get in through the underground tunnel network, and when they get onto the surface, they need to stick to the back alleys to avoid guards, or some of the shadier areas of the town like the port. In this game, your race determines your starting relations with all of the factions in the game, and there are many factions in the game. From my understanding, through really hard work, you can eventually make it so that the guards at Freeport won't kill you on sight if you're an ogre. But I would just assume that if you are this massive thing with about 3 teeth, you're not welcome in civilized society. And so on top of that is also your class, which is also incredibly important. Even if you are, let's say, a civilized human, if you're a class like a necromancer or a shadow knight, you will also run into very similar problems. Whilst, say, a paladin will easily find their way into many cities, rogues and necromancers, classes like that, will have to find their training underground in the places nobody would think to look. Your class isn't just the abilities you have in this game, it's your role in the game's society and world. And accordingly, it will dictate where you can and can't go, who you can and can't speak to, where you shouldn't and should go. And these intricate, interesting details were quite roughly smoothed out with World of Warcraft and the games that came after it. Another factor worth talking about in regards to the character's race is the size of each of the game's playable races. The size difference between a gnome and an ogre is hilarious. It's very, very significant, and this will actually have a big effect on where you can and can't go with that character. Some dungeons will have small tunnels that you just can't get through as an ogre or any of the even medium-sized races, and if you are too big, you have to rely on a shaman to cast a shrink spell on you to make you smaller. Something I completely forgot to talk about as well are illusions. Enchanters can cast illusions to change you to look like a different race. And this is really useful for, getting into places like Freeport as an ogre, or just purely for cosmetic reasons. This can also be done by a few very popular magic items like the Mask of Deception, but I'll get into magic items later. There's some really interesting stuff there too. So a lot of the travel in this game is going to be walking, following roads and landmarks that you've had to learn by heart through your own personal experience, and the route that you should take may vary drastically depending on what kind of character you're playing. Now, there are mounts. They were added a couple of years or so after the game's launch, I think, and they were ridiculously expensive. I don't think many players ever had them back in the day. What most players did have access to, though, is public transport, the part I really wanted to get to. And here we perhaps see the Deep Run tram's first ancestor, the ferries. They're essentially the same as World of Warcraft's ferries. They'll take you from one area to the next. All you need to do is just stand on them for a while and wait until they go. A difference, though, is that you can be waiting a very long time to get from A to B. It can be up to 20 or more minutes, from my understanding. And that is a very, very long time to get from one place to the other. It's definitely not the longest waiting times for public transport we'll see in this video, so stay tuned for that. So I've talked about slow travel and, I guess, public travel, but now let's talk about fast travel, which in this game is handled almost entirely through class-based abilities. If you're a WoW player, that's pretty normal, but I tried to pick quite a diverse range of MMOs for this video, and EverQuest and World of Warcraft are the only two that actually feature class-based travel, which is interesting. Mages can send players to portals, of which there are quite a few static locations throughout the world, just like in World of Warcraft. Druids can send people to druid rings, and there's actually about one every other zone in the whole game. There are quite a load of them, but they can be in quite odd, isolated locations. Shamans can brew potions that will take you to places you can't reach quickly any other way. And plenty of classes have what are essentially emergency button spells that will quickly take you out away from combat if you're about to die. From my understanding of all of these different travel methods, people tend to rely on druids the most. Several times in World of Warcraft, on a new server, I've seen people set up warlock transport facilities where they'll have alts logged in different continents, and you just pay them an amount of money and they'll take you wherever you want to go. This game's equivalent to that are the druid networks. There seems to always be a druid who will, in exchange for money, take you anywhere you want to go. But there are the magic items I mentioned earlier. My favourite example that I've found is the Worker Sledge Mallet, a rare item drop. Now, this is a melee weapon like any other, but it has a chance on hit to teleport you to a place called the Over There, which when you think about it makes it really useful to have a tool in your tool belt. From what I've been told, this sledge mallet wasn't exactly a mainstream method of travel, but everyone knew about it. Apparently it was informally referred to as hammering, according to the Project 1999 wiki anyway. I think stuff like this is just so cool. I can't think of another example of this in another MMO. A rare item drop that sends you to a crazy different place, and something that's actually useful in the form of travel. And just also the weird gameplay gimmick of a chance on hit on a melee weapon. There's one thing I can think of that comes close, and that is in World of Warcraft's Season of Discovery. In one of the raids, I think the Gnomeregan raid, which I loved by the way, there was, I believe, either a ring or a trinket that would randomly teleport you to a load of very strange places across Azeroth. Now, of course, you can't choose where you're going to teleport to, and it's just an on-use effect. But that really is the closest I can think of. As what I guess you could call the EverQuest formula got translated through time into different MMOs, I'm really sad that little things like this got lost in that translation. Okay, so there is one big thing that I haven't talked about. It's kind of an elephant in the room when it comes to travel, and maybe I should have started with it first because it does underpin everything else. The death penalty. Whenever you die in this game, you return to your bind spot, which is essentially wherever you bound your Hearthstone in World of Warcraft, for example. You lose quite a bit of XP, and your corpse, which had all of your gear on it and all of your inventory, will be stuck back where your corpse is. And if you don't get back to your corpse within a few hours, all of that will be lost forever, which sounds awful. I think the death penalty is maybe one of the more controversial things that EverQuest has done that many future MMOs just haven't replicated. I used to play lots of RuneScape, which is something I'll talk about later on in the video, and there was a death penalty in that game where you lost all but your 4 most valuable items on your body, I think. So I am kind of used to something like that, but it does feel just awful to die in a game like this. And I guess that's part of the point. In many open world games today, exploration is fun, and it should be fun, but it's not really much of a challenge. I mean, you can see areas with high level enemies, and if you go in there and get killed, it's usually not really a big deal. But in this game, as well as being fun, exploration is a huge and important challenge. You need to be really careful about where you're going, the levels of the enemies, how far away you are from home, and how realistically you can get back to your corpse should you die. You need to be careful to group up with people that will protect your corpse and help you get to where you died. And you need to be really, really careful about places like Kithakor Forest, or, well, cities full of races that your race isn't friendly with. There's this underlining pressure with discovering what's in this game that exists, I think, at all times. And for some people, including me, I think, it's not my kind of thing. When I play games like this, I like to relax, and I don't want to be punished too much for dying. I do enjoy that pressure when it comes to other kinds of games, but for MMOs, it's just not for me. And from my understanding, in the more recent versions of classic EverQuest, in the TLPs, or time-locked progression servers, which are essentially vanilla EverQuest servers that launch every year with different rule sets to spice things up that the community will keep engaging in. They've actually completely gotten rid of the death penalty, though I do still think you lose a bit of XP. I'm not sure though. But when it comes to EverQuest at least, it's this constant pressure, this adversity, that really brings players together. The world is just too big and unforgiving and undiscovered that you can't go it alone. You have to pool your resources, and it's this pressure that I think solidified the online communities in EverQuest. And these communities are what popularized it and created all the games that came after it, in their own way. I think that one thing that more modern MMOs sometimes struggle with is how to incentivize players to socialize. EverQuest didn't seem to have this problem. You either stick together or die alone. I think this is a great idea that's worth exploring more in MMOs today. But I do think in some places it maybe goes a bit too far for my tastes. For example, being killed on sight in Freeport, which is meant to be one of the game's biggest cities, kind of destroys the idea of players being able to easily get together. Now, the community's workaround for this was for them to form their own social hub. Now, even today in EverQuest's TLP servers, everyone gathers at the market in the East Commonlands Tunnel, which is this great, beautiful solution to the problem of everyone just agreeing that there's one spot where you should meet up. And if you go there in, I think, any version of EverQuest, you'll see loads of players buying and selling and talking. And that's great. It's like a entirely player-run market. But in a way, it's a great solution to a problem that I feel shouldn't exist. Now, a lot of these things I was talking about have been changed greatly over the years throughout EverQuest's development. But I think it's great to just take a look at what was. What was the Kickstarter for all of it? And I think that even though the game came out before the new millennium, there's so much that was forgotten about MMO design that I think should be remembered and maybe even brought back. There is just so much to say about this game, but maybe another day, and maybe by somebody who knows a bit more about it. For now though, we can just enjoy the imprint that this game made on all of those that came after it, including everything else in this video. Thanks, EverQuest. Black Desert Online is about 10 years old now, and it must have found its way onto my Steam library at some point. I don't remember when. Until recently, I'd never actually played it myself. It's got the reputation of quite a grindy game, and that really dissuaded me. And as I found out, it is, yes, a grindy game, and it is dissuading, and I don't really like the combat. But there is one part of it that I really do like. And you're looking at it now. The visuals and its world, which are two things. Ignore that. Two things. The visuals and the world are both great. When I opened the world map for the first time, something really caught my eye and interested me. These little icons here, slowly moving throughout the world. Even if you haven't explored the world, you can see these little icons of carts and ships move across it, and immediately you think you're in this huge networked experience. Now, of course, the reason why I was in this game was to check out its travel, and so this was incredibly interesting to me. Turns out it didn't quite deserve my interest. Almost all of these little icons don't really represent anything tangible. They are actual ships and carts in the world, and they have their predestined lanes that they go back and forth from. You can't actually get on these things. There's no real travelling system. They're all for show, sadly. Well, all but a small handful, but I'll get to those later. Now that was an initial disappointment, but there is a lot more to travel in this game, so let's get into that. The most obvious form of travel, aside from using your 2 feet, is the mounts system, which is very prevalent in just about every single MMORPG. Not quite in the tutorial, but still during the hand-holding stage of the game, you're given a horse. Now for some reason, I got a tier 7 mythical shiny magic horse, which seems to be an end game mount. I think all players get this in these seasonal servers. I picked a seasonal server, by the way, because it's where everyone seems to be playing. I don't really know too much about them other than that. So maybe I did skip a lot of the mount progression. I never quite learned how to properly control the horse in this game, but it is a very efficient way of traversing the world. And you need these efficient ways, because the map is absolutely huge. The starting area of the game in and around the small port village of Vverian is quite big. Running around for the first few levels does take a while. You're immediately given a strong sense of scale for the world. But going onto the world map and zooming out, you'll figure out that Vverian was nothing. It was a pixel. The time it would take to actually travel from one side of this world to the other on foot, I mean, someone must have done it, but it would have. It is a huge undertaking. And so a mount like this is just perfect. Despite having the tier 7 mythical pony, I didn't feel like I was going too fast. In fact, this felt like just about the speed a mount should be in a world this big. So when I got this horse, that was when the game really opened up to me. I kind of left the questing aside for a bit and just went off exploring, because there was a lot of exploring to do. And it was during this that I really soaked in how amazing the graphics are in this game. If you stop and go a bit too slowly, you can see maybe a lack of detail. The facade of the fidelity of the game breaks apart a little bit. The game feels a little bit too empty in some areas. But at the speed of a horse, the game just feels perfect. All of the foliage and stuff looks great. The best part, though, is the towns and settlements. So Vverian looks quite nice, but then Heidel, the second settlement you go to, is absolutely beautiful. There's this huge castle, and then a couple of streets going down along the side of it. These are some of the best examples of settlements in MMOs. Just the lighting, the architecture, it just works, right? I afterwards went to a place called Calphion, which I think is supposed to be like the main city of the game, and Calphion is absolutely beautiful. Travel is, more often than not, just a means to an end. It's the way that you get from one piece of content to another. It's not necessarily a piece of content in and of itself. But with a game this beautiful and a world so big, travel for travel's sake is very viable. It was an entertaining way to experience the game. If I had to make one small criticism, though, it's the amount of roads. If you look pretty much anywhere on the world map where you've explored, it will look like a pane of smashed glass or a cobweb or something like that, because there are so many roads. If you want to get anywhere in this world map, there is not only a road there, but a road route so efficient that it's essentially a straight line. When the player base is split between these roads, that means you'll see less players, even if it is slightly more efficient to get across the world. I did see very few players traveling, maybe a handful on the ins and outs of cities, and of course inside the settlements as well, there are quite a few. But whilst in the countryside, you see very few players, and I wonder if this is a part of the reason why, because they are here. There's just about 10 roads for every one player. And this does make me feel alone in such a huge world with so many people playing it. And I shouldn't feel that, right? Okay, so that's enough about horses. Let's talk about sailing, because though the land masses in this game are huge, the ocean is incredibly big. And the way you navigate the ocean is with your own ships. Coming across other players, I think, is quite rare in the ocean. And you know what? I didn't mind it so much, because the waves of this game have a different quality to the roads. It's relaxing and it feels good to be alone. It reminds me a bit of Sea of Thieves, when the ambience and the waves and the graphics and everything just hits just right. That's the kind of experience that is enjoyable alone. One thing I've also not talked about yet, and this affects both the sailing and the horse riding, is the music for this game. The exploration music in this game really makes you feel like you're going on an adventure, and I would go on about it more, but I've had it playing in the background this whole time, so you can make up your own opinions on it. Now, though travel is really cool and immersive and all of that, it is a huge time sink because the world is just that big, and therefore I can understand the inclusion of the next travel method I'm going to talk about, fast travel. Now, this is second-hand information because the fast travel system is unlocked at the end game via a long quest line, from my understanding. I haven't been to that end game, so this is mostly through research. But the fast travel is called the Magnus system, and it can take you between any of the game's major cities. Now, fast travel, fundamentally, will damage the feeling of a world scale, and disrupt the player's place within that world. But from what I've seen, it's really not that bad in Black Desert Online. The world is so huge and so time-consuming to cross on horseback that I get it. I really do. And hey, at least it's not Bethesda-style fast travel where you can go anywhere you want. It is just major cities, and so the scale of the world isn't completely damaged by this. So considering the size of the world, the fact that it's an endgame thing only, and the fact that there's a long quest line behind it, and the fact that it's only from one major city to another, I think that if you have to have fast travel in your MMO, this is the way to do it. Okay, so onto the section that I really wanted to talk about. Earlier, I said that these icons across the maps are almost entirely useless. They're all mostly cosmetic, aside from about 3. And that's because this game has a ferry system. It has public transport. And I don't think a lot of Black Desert Online's players will even know this. I struggled to find any proper information about this public transport until I came upon a website called grumpygreen.cricket, which had a guide on the game's ferries, griffins, and sky balloons. When first entering Velia, the starter town, above the huge throng of players that are always fishing below, you'll have noticed this flying griffin attached to a pile of timber, or the pile of timber is attached to the griffin. I thought nothing of it at the time. I mean, when you enter a new fantasy universe, you kind of don't have expectations. So if you see something really weird looking, especially in Korean MMOs, you kind of you're okay with it. You just let it go. You don't really think about it. But this griffin is actually really important. If you were to climb on top of that timber, it would take off and you'd go up into the skies with it. This is actually a transport route over to the island of Ilia, off to the northeast. And it takes you up into the air in a way that I had not seen before. It is beautiful up here. And this, maybe more than the world map, gives an accurate scale of how big this world is. Look in any direction and you can see landmarks. Mountains, forests, oceans, islands, cities and castles in the far distance. You can see off to the east, this place here, this looks really interesting. Then also, to the south-ish is this huge castle-type structure built into a cliff, almost like Minas Tirith. Now, I don't think I ever discovered what those places are. I'm entirely ignorant of all the different interesting places you can go to in this game. And that makes sites like this amazing. If you don't know what's there, if you don't know what to expect, it makes exploration exciting. So, 5 minutes and 20 seconds later, we arrive at Ilia Island, and this place is beautiful. Now, I'm assuming there's content you're supposed to be doing here. I'm assuming there's some reason for it to exist. But to me, to my uneducated tourist eyes, it is a resort island. It is so beautiful, and it seems quite detached from the rest of the world. So this time, there's a ferry to catch. There are actually 2 that leave from the fishing village here at Ilia. One of them goes back to Velia, and the other one goes even further north to an island called Ophelia's Eye. Problem is, there is a long wait time to get that ferry. So while waiting, let's go climb the nearest mountain. The view here is astounding. There's not much to say, really. Just look at it. Now, I didn't play this game much, and I've not played it really since, but there are a few times I've felt a feeling of wanderlust more than here at the top of Ilia Island. Now, another thing I want to talk about before the ferry arrives are the NPCs in the settlements. Now, you would have seen them from previous bits of footage in this video, but the amount of detail is astounding. Even this small fishing village is full of people. And now, I don't think they move anywhere, they don't have schedules, it's all set dressing, they're not real NPCs, if that makes sense. But it feels alive. Despite this being a sleepy fishing village, there are men, women, children, guards, workers, a blacksmith, everything you'd expect to realistically be here. And though I'm kind of feeling the lack of players a bit, I'm not getting the liminal space kind of vibes you get from a lot of MMOs with low populations. It feels alive even when it really isn't, and that's really cool. And it's really immersive as well, especially in the larger cities. Okay, so after 20 odd minutes of waiting, the ferry's here. Let's see how long it takes us to get to Ophelia's Eye, from departure to arrival. "20 minutes. It's quite clear why I'm the only passenger, isn't it? Ophelia's Eye is a tropical island, far away from the mainland. There's nothing substantive nearby in any direction. I don't know much about this game, and so I'd never quite found my place in it anyway. But here, I'm far more lost than I ever was back there. We're really far away from Vverian now, where I started the game, and we're going to go further, because there's another ship to catch. Another reason not to catch these ships, by the way, aside from how bloody long it takes, is this. I was not expecting this to happen. The two ships also bugged inside each other, and when they separated, I got stuck inside one of them, which sadly ruined the view even further northwards. So I waited 7 minutes for the ships just to set sail, and then roughly another 40 minutes until reaching the destination. But when I got there, it was worth it. The land of the morning light. It's this huge island well off to the north of everything else, and it takes on a much more eastern aesthetic. I'm assuming that this place was added in some kind of expansion, but I'm not sure. Honestly, I enjoy my ignorance of this game. Everything has much more of an allure if you have no idea what it is, and as I'm a tourist as opposed to a proper player of this game, that's what I'm looking for. Well, that's the incredibly long transport journey out of the way. It's an amazing adventure, if too time-consuming and way too buggy. And sadly, those two things make it entirely useless. I saw not one other person on these ferries with me, and I don't expect ever to. But just because something is useless, it doesn't mean it's not interesting. And if I'd fast-travelled up here instead, I'd never have gotten that same sense of how huge this world is. I'd never have felt the wanderlust that I felt at the top of Ilia Island. And this kind of scale and this kind of adventure is really important in open worlds. I just wish the ships were maybe a bit faster, and so that there was an actual incentive to use them, so I wouldn't be so alone. So, BDO has entertaining horseback travel, relaxing sailing, a reasonable fast travel system, and secret ferry lanes. Though you won't interact with many players on your journeys, the world is as beautiful as it is big. But I did neglect to mention something. The T key. Want to get just about anywhere in the game without having to even be at your keyboard? Set a map marker, get on the saddle or behind the wheel, and press T. The game will take you there automatically through auto navigation. Ever see anyone travelling in the open world? They can't see you, they're probably not even at their desk. Need to navigate a huge mountain range or forest to get to your destination? A path will be made for you. You don't even need to think about it. Now, there is definitely a sense of satisfaction in being able to get around so efficiently, and it also definitely does save time, but at what cost? How can this game's beautiful world be properly showcased if the player doesn't even need to look at the screen? Berries and griffins wouldn't be very useful without auto navigation, but with it, they're completely pointless. When all that separates one place from another is essentially a loading screen, why is there an open world at all? You could choose not to use this feature, but everyone else still will. Unless you see someone in combat, chances are the lights are on but no one's home. For a lot of this game's player base, I'm sure it's not a major concern. But for me, it's a bit of a deal breaker. Like other MMORPGs, I'm sure there is a lot of social interaction at the end game. But in all of the hours before then, it feels more like a massively single-player online game. Black Desert Online feels too big. So big that this auto-travel kind of makes sense. But is the size the problem? Or does the lack of a population just make it seem that way? I'm not sure, but either way, I do recommend giving this game a go, for the sights alone. Nine Dragons was developed in Korea, just like Black Desert Online. But unlike Black Desert Online, it's an Eastern martial arts MMO that was published in the West in 2007. Now, when I was young, I wasn't allowed to spend any money online, so I played loads of free-to-play games, and this was one of them. Now, that has to have been, 16, 17 years ago? I guess you know you've had good memories with a game if you can still remember it fondly all that time later. And recently, when I saw it had its own Steam page, I couldn't resist but to dive back in, for nostalgia's sake. This game was just one of many titles that took place in the post-WoW boom era of MMORPGs, and so it's similar to World of Warcraft in quite a few ways. It's got the traditional theme park MMO design of being relatively linear areas that go from zone to zone, level bracket to level bracket, until you hit the end game with raiding guilds, a player-run economy, open-world PvP, stuff like that. Also, similarly to World of Warcraft, are the factions in the game. They're split into two big sides, the Black Clans and the White Clans, just like the Alliance and the Horde. And each individual clan has a load of different kung fu techniques. All of the spells you would traditionally think of, like a heal, a buff, or plain auto attacks, most importantly, all have their own really cool animations. The auto attacks are the most impressive, to be honest, because these are the best animations of this era that I've seen. The child in me still thinks this stuff is incredibly cool. And the more you use a certain kung fu technique, the more you unlock of its moveset. And when it's max level, it's probably time to learn the next technique, the next auto attack. And all 6 clans have their own unique auto attacks in several different tiers. And all of these clans are also divided into their own specs. So the tank spec and the healer spec will have different auto attack animations for each individual clan in the game, meaning the amount of really cool animations in this game surpasses any other game that I know. And after playing a paladin a lot in World of Warcraft and just auto attacking and bonking something with my hammer, yeah, it's hard to go back to that when you've got auto attacks that look as cool as this. This game, in my mind, has established what auto attacks should be like in MMORPGs, and so looking at any other game's monk class, or the melee combat of any class really, just isn't the same anymore. The simple act of just attacking an enemy is so visually satisfying in this game. But, okay, that was a tangent. I'm here to talk about travel, aren't I? One of these categories of Kung Fu is called Lightfoot. And Lightfoot is essentially the equivalent that this MMO has to mounts. So instead of riding on some kind of horse or flying on some kind of big bird, you run. And just like with other Kung Fu techniques in this game, the more you run, the better you get at running and the faster you get. Now, when I first played this game a long time ago, I believe it was quite hard. It took a while to get your first Lightfoot skill. And so you had this established sense of how big the world is. You can only really jog from one place to another. And once you get used to this, you get an idea of how big the world is, how long it takes to get from one place to another. And then, when you eventually manage to unlock Lightfoot, that is blown open. And it feels great. I really like it when a sense of scale is properly and realistically established and then broken through your hard work. Unfortunately, in the current version of the game, you unlock it at level 1 after completing the first quest, and it's called Cruising Along. And though it's the most basic, it still looks really cool, and the sound effect is really satisfying. Eventually, when you join a clan, you'll get their unique basic Lightfoot technique, which is a very unique animation. It's very different for each of the 6 clans. And as you progress through the game and go up in levels, you'll be using more and more Lightfoot, and so your Lightfoot level will increase and you'll move faster, meaning that organically, this game's version of mount travel will scale with the player. As the players progress through the game, their level increases, they need to do more travelling, but they get faster at travelling because they've been travelling more. It's a satisfying grind, and it just makes sense. It works for the world, it works for the MMO gameplay, and I still think it looks incredibly cool. One of the underlying themes that I think I enjoy about this game is the fact that it's not really a fantasy game. I mean, especially when you get to the end game, your characters start doing some crazy magical stuff, sure. But the idea is that through a spiritual awakening and hard training, you are bringing this stuff out of yourself. It doesn't feel like the ability to travel really fast has been gifted to you in any way. It feels like your character is really awesome, and that's why it's happening. And that gives a bit of a power fantasy. I feel confident about my character's abilities at all times, even if I am well below the max level of 200 and something. Okay, so I've talked about Lightfoot in isolation. I think it's really good, and I think more games should have something like it. There's no social aspect to this, you're running too fast to really interact with other players, but in of itself, I think it's cooler than horseback riding. But by how much does Lightfoot actually work in the game world? Well, there's a couple of reasons why it really does, and a couple of reasons why it really doesn't. First off, the graphics in this game. Now, this mid to late thousands RPG aesthetic of just insane amounts of bloom, it really does it for me. I love games that look like this. The game almost looks like an Eastern Oblivion sometimes. Though the bloom here really is ridiculous. There's an option in the graphic settings, which I believe is the bloom, and if you just look at what the game looks like when you turn it off compared to when it's on, that's incredible. Another thing is the music. Now, I have no idea who composed this stuff, but I think it's really cool. There's not a lot of music in this game, there's like one track per zone, and I imagine at the end game that can get a bit boring. If you've logged, 200-300 hours in this game, I imagine you turn the music off, but that's the same with most games. I think most endgame players have the music off after a certain amount of time. I know I'm the same with World of Warcraft, and I adore the soundtrack to that game. So audio-visually, it's really stimulating, but from a more gameplay perspective, it's not so good. First off is the very linear zone design. Now, theme parks like this that are very derivative from World of Warcraft always have a degree of linearity. There's always one, maybe two entrances to the zone, and then maybe one or two exits. And you start at a lower level zone, you go to that zone, then you go to the next bracket, then the next bracket, and then you're at the end of the game. That's the same with most MMOs like this. It's very established. But the zone design in this game is incredibly linear. It is essentially just a single straight line from the start to the very end of the game. From what I've seen, there is very little open world exploration in this game. Now, the line going from one place to another is very squiggly, so it looks as if it's open countryside, but it really is just a track from start to end. And this means that the first few times traveling with Lightfoot, with the music and everything, is going to be really satisfying. But if you become a regular at this game, I imagine this gets really boring. There's no alternate routes to take. After a while, I imagine you never even need to look at the map. In fact, I think someone who's brand new to this game probably doesn't need to look at the map to navigate. You can just follow the road from one place to another and never get lost. Up until now, I've been very positive about this game, but this is where it starts to go downhill a bit. Because if you thought that the T key in Black Desert Online was bad, the auto-navigation, it's got nothing on this game's E key. While playing through the main quest, you get a load of tokens, it's a currency, and then you spend that currency by pressing E. This opens up a menu of every settlement in the entire game, and you spend one token and you can just teleport there. You can fast travel to any major or minor settlement in the entire game whenever you want. You can be at the bottom of a dungeon, you can be in the middle of combat, it doesn't matter, you can go whenever you want. And these tokens are very prolific. Whilst leveling up a character, I had around 50 on me when I stopped playing at around level 80, and I was actively using them as well, and so if you don't use them, I have no idea how many you'd have. So you essentially have free fast travel to wherever you want, whenever you want. And on top of this, if you're doing the main quest line, which is where all the good XP is, you can just open the quest log, click on that quest, it'll open up a mini map, and you can just click on the objective to teleport there. Also with no restrictions. This doesn't just take you to the zone you need to be in, this takes you to exactly where you need to be. So if you need to kill a certain mob in the middle of nowhere, You can just teleport straight to those mobs with no downtime, which almost entirely invalidates Lightfoot, one of the coolest travel methods I've seen for a game. And that's really frustrating. There are parts of this game, and I'll go over a couple more later, that are amazing in isolation, which to this day, new MMOs should be learning from. But as a whole, this game is on its way out. These tokens, like many other things, you can buy on the in-game shop. Many things from the in-game shop can then be sold at the auction house, which over the past 10-ish years has caused hyperinflation, where if you go to any of the stalls in the game's main hub, you will see loads of items being sold for what I think is gold cap. Now, I don't see any way for players to get to those items without getting to the end game and buying stuff with real money to sell it. It looks like it's created this isolated economy where the only way in is to pay. And maybe that's wrong, I don't know, because this game has very, very little documentation. The player base of this game, the hardcore player base that are still playing this game, is too small to have a properly functioning wiki. And so how to get most items, how to get to endgame, what the stats do exactly, all of this stuff that you're used to Googling in any other game just isn't available here. If you want to know how to play this game properly and how to get to the end game and do that content, you need to know someone who's already doing it. Another thing is all MMOs have big open spaces. This game has some really open spaces. Now, you can imagine the idea is that, especially when the game released, there are loads, hundreds, thousands of people playing this game, and so these open spaces will have crowds of people, so it makes sense. But you do get this liminal feeling when there is no one there. There are some areas as well which are really open, and I feel like even when the game was flooded with people nearly 20 years ago, there wouldn't be that many people here. It's just kind of strange. This place especially got to me. It's in the Wu-Tang Temple, the hub area of the faction that I first joined. And knowing that chances are I'm the only person in this entire zone, and just looking at this large open area, I don't know, it kind of freaked me out. The same can be especially said for the hub area in the game. This is this game's equivalent of something like Stormwind. There's supposed to be hundreds of players here, and there are players here, but the vast majority of them are either AFK or running a stall where they sell endgame items at gold cap, and they just never move. Now, it was a long time ago, so my memories aren't the strongest, but I do have memories of being in this big city, and there being so much more life. And now it just feels weird when the music and all the open space is all designed towards a high population area. It's got this energy of an active, bustling crowd, but it's just not there, and that juxtaposition just kind of messes with you a bit. Hidden inside the big city is this lone alleyway which doesn't lead anywhere. Now, I remember finding this place and thinking it was really cool as a kid. In fact, I think it's my strongest memory of the game. And back then, I do strongly remember there being players here, maybe a couple of people talking, a couple of stalls set up right in the corner. It seems to have been where the cool kids hung out. But now it's just empty. And that has an effect on me. It feels like, you know when you walk past a house that you used to live in when you were a kid? It looks about the same, it seems to match up with your memories well enough, but there's no going inside, there's no access to it. It's right there in front of you, it's not changed this whole time, it looks exactly the same. But at the same time, it's decades away, locked behind time. And as a whole, that's what Nine Dragons feels like to me, locked away in the past. Now the game is still being kept alive, I'm assuming by a handful of whales that use the cash shop. And if anything, I'm thankful for them, so I could log into this game one more time and make this video and relive those memories. Though the game is in quite a sorry state, like many games of this era that didn't quite make it, at least it's alive. At least the servers are up, and in that way, I suppose it's lucky. So unlike Black Desert Online, I don't necessarily recommend that you try this game out. I don't think it has a future. But there are things in isolation about this game that even today are worth talking about and that MMOs should learn from. So I really like the animations, I really like leveling up individual skills and then going to different tiers. I do quite like how advanced tiers of Kung Fu are available as rare item drops, meaning that you either go out to grind or you use the player economy to get them. Now, I did want to show you an advanced Lightfoot technique and how much cooler they look than the ones you've seen. But I couldn't because I couldn't see any other players doing them, so I couldn't get footage of it that way. and I couldn't get hands on one myself because though there are some being sold on the auction house, they are ridiculously expensive. There's some other stuff as well, like every 12 levels, your level will go up a tier. You have to do this funny chi breathing minigame, but I just really like the idea of naming every set of levels in the game after something. It has the same effect that Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas has, where a tier of every few levels has a different name that is also different depending on your karma level. It's a description of who you are and how you've progressed and who you are in relation to the world, and that's great. The idea that the first 12 levels in this game is described as you losing yourself as you become the person you're going to be, that's really powerful. I really like that. I think it would be really cool if World of Warcraft did this. You started off as a vagrant and then an adventurer or something like that. Even shooters have done this for ages. I mean, what's cooler, just a numerical level or being called a private and then a corporal and then a sergeant? It's almost something that we've forgotten that could be applied to an MMO. I really like it. I also really like the idea of being a vagabond, as opposed to in most other games where you start off inside the faction you're going to be on from character creation. In this, you spend the first, what could be few hours as a vagabond, with no clan, no family to call home. You can then travel around the world, quest in all the different starter zones if you want, train in all the different unique weapon types, and then learn more and more about each clan, and then, only after spending lots of time as a vagabond, choose who you want to associate with, who you want to progress the game with. You can also, if you like a challenge, stay as a vagabond. Now you'll never really learn new kung fu, which gets painful, but for a good while, there's a good progression there. In fact, I did try it on my second character. I got to like level 30 or something without picking a clan, and it's doable, it's a cool challenge, and it's a cool character identity as well. It's interesting to be some kind of Ronin or Hedge Knight character that hasn't picked a lord or master, and that's another thing I wish other games did. So yeah, anyway. Goodbye, Nine Dragons. I'll miss you. Thanks for the memories. Around 20 years ago, I suffered from my first ever bout of gaming addiction, and it was here on RuneScape. Since then, the game has changed significantly. Then a new version of it was made that reverted things back, and then from then on it also changed significantly. Today I'm going to specifically be talking about that version, old school RuneScape, which is based off of a 2007 build of the game. But just know that there is definitely overlap between the two. Okay, so travel in RuneScape is like an onion. It has layers, and it gets deeper the further you go. So then, let's begin our journey at the start of the game, at Lumbridge. Lumbridge is the starter town, city, village. It's hard to put a scale on this kind of thing, but it's a big castle, a handful of buildings, and a church. Right across the bridge over the River Lum, hence the name of the settlement, are some goblins, some of the first enemies you'll fight in the game. Out the back of the graveyard is some of the first ever fishing spots and mining spots. A bit further over the bridge and through this toll gate is Al-Kharid, an Arabian-style settlement in the desert. Then through this swamp is something cool. There's this dirt track behind the castle that leads to some cool areas like a wizard's tower. This road leads to somewhere important, and that road leads to somewhere important, and it can be a bit overwhelming. RuneScape's world does not keep you on rails. There is no low-level area that you finish and graduate to a middle-level area and so on. Instead, you have to explore and find select things in the world that are the right level for you. And this game doesn't have a centralized XP system like, let's say, Nine Dragons or Black Desert Online. Instead, it's got a whole host of skills which are all leveled up completely independently of each other. And so depending on your very unique skill set and your strengths and weaknesses in certain areas, you'll find yourself in completely different parts of the world with completely different kinds of people. In order to get the most out of this game, you don't just stay in your lane and only move on when you feel ready. You have to go out there and get yourself into danger. For example, passing into what is arguably the game's main city, Varrock, requires you to either go up against a bear or a load of dark wizards, which have an infamous reputation for killing low-level players on their way in. But once you're there, you've got access to the game's huge auction house, the Varrock sewers, a great dungeon to level up your combat skills early on. And there are also a few really good quests here, like the Shield of Arav, one of the few quests in the game which requires help from another player to complete. Romeo and Juliet, a really silly story that's worth doing anyway. And one of the coolest quests in the early game, Demon Slayer, where you have to find the keys to open the case to get the legendary demon-killing sword. And, kill the demon with it. No matter what stage of the game you're in, there is always a use to a certain area. You'll always see people coming in out of Varrock and Lumbridge and the other many settlements in the game. Because a good spot for fishing is always going to be a good spot for fishing, no matter what your level is. And just because this person is in crazy looking armor that you'll probably never even get to touch in your playthrough, that doesn't necessarily mean that their crafting level, for example, is any higher than yours is. So the early game in RuneScape, which itself adds up to many hours as this is a very grindy game, is mostly spent darting along between a few major settlements, like Falador, Varrock, Lumbridge, and Port Sarim. But like some kind of pinball in its machine, you end up feeling the borders and the walls blocking you in, and you want to break free. With a standard free RuneScape account, there are loads of locked doors that you just can't go through, fence gates that you can't even try to hop over, and loads of skills that you can't even attempt. And so when you start paying the monthly subscription to become a member, the doors to the rest of this world blow wide open, and the game gets so much deeper. So this is the area of the game that free accounts can access, and this is the entire map. It's quite clear that just simply running around won't cut it anymore. And that's why this game has alternate methods of travel. In fact, this game has more methods of travel than I think any game I know of ever. As a low-level player, you may unlock some basic teleport spells, which can take you to major settlements, and you can also spend a bit of money to charter a ship from one port to another. That can come in quite handy. There's even a quest in the free version of the game that involves taking one of these ships to an island to smuggle rum. But okay, it's an exhaustive list, I'm just going to get through it, so that you can get a good idea of exactly how much travel you are capable of in this game. So as well as having magical spells, you can also create magical tablets, which are tradable teleport items. You can enchant several different items of jewelry, which will take you to several different areas. For example, the games necklace can take you to many of the game's different minigames. During the Fairy Tale quest line, you unlock the ability to travel through fairy rings, where you input sequences of 3 letters to teleport to the different rings throughout the entire game. Through the Gnome quest line, you access the ability to travel through spirit trees, although not all are available and some of them you have to grow yourself. In the new continent, unique to old school RuneScape, they added a minecart network. In the new continent, Varlamore, they added a Quetzal transport system where you fly on giant birds. If you do a certain Gnome quest, they can also help you hand glide throughout the map with the Gnome glider system. After finishing the Eagle's Peak quest, eagles can take you to several different areas. In the desert area in the southeast of the map, there's a magic carpet system. There are several areas where you can make a canoe and then row it downstream. In some areas, there are just magic levers where when you pull them, you get teleported somewhere random. The list just goes on. The OSRS wiki is perhaps the best wiki I've ever been to for a video game, and the transportation page has everything documented there. I couldn't possibly go over everything, this was just the most significant stuff. RuneScape's world is absolutely huge, but with this absolutely huge list of fast travel methods, the question doesn't become of how can I get there quickly? You know you can get there quickly. It's how quickly can you get there? There's convenient travel to all corners of this world's map, and instead, travel in this game becomes purely about efficiency. None of these travel methods will take you precisely where you want to go. They'll always take you in the rough area. And so memorizing all of these different fast travel systems and how they interact with each other can be very rewarding. It's all about cutting down on running. And running, by the way, if you are a member, has its own associated skill, agility. Agility is increased by completing obstacle courses and affects how slowly your run energy is drained whilst running, meaning you can go on sprints for longer durations. The higher your level is, the more agility shortcuts you unlock too, such as climbing under walls or over mountains, and this, on top of everything else, makes travel even more efficient. Probably the most common clothing set you'll see in the entire game is the Graceful set, unlocked by grinding agility. The Graceful set not only increases the rate at which your run energy recovers after running, but will also have a negative effect on your character's overall weight, because the weight of your character, i.e. what they're wearing and carrying, will also affect run energy drain. With a full graceful set, I'm pretty sure you can have minus total weight. No idea how that's supposed to work, but you know. Okay, so all of this is really overwhelming and confusing. I mean, it's confusing me just talking about it. But the truth is that you don't have access to almost any of these things from the start. These all require the completion of quests that can have tough prerequisites, be part of a long quest line, or just be difficult in and of themselves. Some things, like the spirit trees, need to be grown with a very high farming level. Without completing a certain quest, some areas in this game are completely off limits, and fast travel won't help with that. It's still going to be locked. Though there are many fast travel systems overlaying on top of each other, you are drip-fed these systems. First, you have to run or charter ships everywhere, and it can be painful, and then eventually you start teleporting to places. And you'll also keep passing agility shortcuts that you can't interact with, and know that as soon as you unlock that, your travel is going to be much more efficient, and then eventually you do. So the feeling of just how big this world is and how hard it is to cross it is firmly established before slowly, system after system, you unlock incredibly powerful travel. This game has incredibly efficient and easy to use fast travel, but it won't give it to you. You have to earn it. And I think this is how fast travel should be done. I now remember there are several things I forgot, like there's also a hot air balloon system, didn't mention that. There are several quests that make things so easier. I think it's the dwarf cannon quest, but it allows you to travel underneath this mountain through a dwarf tunnel. And the dwarf tunnel has a pub in it, which is amazing. Also, the toll gate I mentioned earlier is free after the completion of a certain quest. So it's not just huge broad systems that unlock travel in this game, it's individual acts to open individual doors. I know it doesn't sound like all that much, but this kind of thing is really important. Every time I go under this tunnel, for example, I remember this quest. I remember that I earned this tunnel. And every time I run and scale this hill, I remember what it was like to not be able to do that and have to go around this huge mountain instead. And in the early game, climbing this mountain, by the way, can get you killed. Okay, I could keep doing this for ages, so let's stop there and move on. Now, usually I don't like fast travel in my RPGs, but I think it's very important to understand that RuneScape isn't like, I don't know, World of Warcraft. It can't be treated the same way. It's not trying to achieve the same experience. I would say that RuneScape is a very social game, but only passively. This game isn't really designed around grouping or meeting other players and doing quests with them, and so it doesn't really suffer from a lack of that, like I'd argue many more modern MMORPGs do in the theme parky mold. Now, there is active interaction with other players in this game. There's a PvP scene that a lot of people get really into. There are some endgame raids and boss fights, and there's quite a few mini-games that require teamwork. But the mini-games really are quite mini, and the endgame really is at the end. And so, the vast majority of playtime in this game will essentially be spent alone. Essentially, this game is played like a single-player game. There just happen to be other players around you. The closest to any social interaction most players will have is at the Grand Exchange when buying and selling goods through an automated system in which you never know the seller or the buyer. And that's completely fine, which slightly confuses me because traditionally I've always held the opinion that social interaction is the most important part of any MMO. And I still think it is, but I think it's also worthwhile to differentiate between an active or a passive interaction. Actively talking to someone, grouping with someone, doing content with them, that is really important in games like this. But the passive interaction is also really important. Even if you don't necessarily talk to players, just passing them in the street or in a city crowd, or engaging in the same economy with them, or interacting with the same world that they do, is all really important. What makes a truly online living world isn't necessarily people talking to each other, it's just people being with each other. And I think that's something that I crave from online games, more so than active interaction. World of Warcraft's Deep Run Tram isn't amazing because you actively get into conversations with the people on it with you. It's because, if just for a moment, you are together with other people on the same adventure as you. You don't necessarily have to say anything, you just have to acknowledge each other's existence. As I'm saying this now, it doesn't sound like a big deal. I think it would be very hard to pitch this kind of thing at a game design meeting. It just doesn't sound important. It doesn't sound real. It sounds like a theory. But I think it's incredibly true that these small things, almost accidental occurrences, are a central pillar to this genre of game. Now, I don't want to have to actively engage with everyone I see in a video game. That sounds absolutely exhausting. But despite that, being constantly around lots of other people really relaxes me. And it almost sounds like that doesn't make sense. I've got no interest in actively talking to RuneScape's other players, but I couldn't play the game without them. Other players being here doesn't help with gameplay. If anything, it can confuse it when someone steals your mining node or gets in the way of an important NPC. But this isn't about gameplay. Being around other people isn't a game that's played. It's something to experience, to exist in. I believe that we are here for the sake of each other. And when games can fulfill our need to be around others, it can give us a great sense of satisfaction. And not the kind of hit of satisfaction that a boss kill or a level up would give you, but more so a constant hum, the hum of human activity. And that's what makes RuneScape feel so alive. And why, even after about 2 decades, I still love spending time here. I'm sure you're aware that in 2007, many MMORPGs launched. The one I'm going to talk about today, though, is probably one you've not heard of. Pirates of the Caribbean Online. Disney's attempt to penetrate into this huge, growing MMO market that had taken gaming by storm. I played this game when I was young, around the same time as Nine Dragons, absolutely loved it, and then never got too far in because they didn't accept non-US credit cards, so I couldn't buy the membership. Many years later, I looked back to see what had happened to this MMO, and it turns out that it shut down in 2013. But a private server project, The Legends of Pirates Online, or TLOPO, launched in 2017, and that's what you're seeing now. This is how you play this game. Official support died many years ago, and instead the community alone props it up. And they seem to have done a great job. The game seems to have a semi-active development team and receives semi-regular updates. And from my understanding, the game is not monetized in any way. There is absolutely no cash shop, no purchases to be made. There is, from my understanding, no way to donate to the dev team in any form. It seems to be running entirely on passion. I just hope it doesn't cost them too much though, because they show all of their statistics live on their website, and the game seems to peak at give or take 300 every night. Now that is a sign of a small but incredibly strong community, but I can imagine it must not be cheap to keep everything running. Okay, so why am I talking about this game? As I kind of alluded to earlier, this game is one of countless that released around 2007 in this genre. Well, as with Nine Dragons, part of it is nostalgia, and also part of it is that you probably haven't heard of this game, and so it's interesting to showcase it. But a third reason is that fundamentally, but philosophically, travel is designed differently in this game to most other MMOs, and I think it's worth talking about. For this video, I've tried to select MMOs that aren't necessarily popular or from varied years of release, but just ones that treat travel differently. And with Pirates of the Caribbean Online, or The Legend of Pirates Online, whatever you want to call it, it is different and it's unique, and it's worth talking about. Okay, so this is a pirate game, obviously, so if you had to make one guess as to what the most substantial form of travel is in this game, you'd be correct. Sailing is the form of travel you're first introduced to in this game, and it's by far the best. It's almost not appropriate just to call sailing travel, because it's a significant part of the game itself, and in fact, in the time that I've played it, it's been most of the game. It serves the basic and very necessary utility of getting you from one island to another, but sailing also has ship combat, which I've spent more time doing than any other kind of combat, and it's really fun. Now, I don't want to get too distracted, but tying together an important aspect of your gameplay with travel is a really good idea. Even if ship combat isn't the purpose for you being on the high seas, you can always sink 2 or 3 ships on the way from one island to another and get a bit of XP, and that's great. Come to think of it, I can't think of travel in other games that is like this, where you can do something else whilst getting from A to B. It's usually either talking to people next to you, which is the crux of this video, to be fair, or tabbing out or just leaving your desk. Maybe this should be explored. Another aspect, which may be a hit or miss, is the way the game looks. Now, I have spoken to several people, of which at least one of them just was not a fan of how the game looks at all, but I quite like this art style. It's nice and charming, and it seems to have survived well enough into the modern era. It hasn't aged too badly. And this is seen most prominently when sailing. Now, I'm not sure if these are improvements that have been made since the launch of this private server, or if they were here in the original Disney release of the game, but especially when sailing, everything just looks good. The water reflections look great. Now, of course, it doesn't have anything near the fidelity of Black Desert Online sailing, but if you can get into this Disney-ish aesthetic, I think you can get into sailing in this game quite easily. The controls are very simple to understand as well. You just kind of press W and S to change your sails. You press W once to put your sails down, and then you just wait for speed to accumulate. There is no wind mechanic. You don't have to deal with wind in this game, which is a bit surprising really for me after playing Black Desert Online and Sea of Thieves. But yeah, it's incredibly simple. The music is really nice too, you can hear it right now. And even from the start of the game, it's just a very efficient way of travel. I'm clicking now between all the different ship types you can get in the game, and if you pay attention to the speed stat, you can see it doesn't really go up that much from, let's say, the light sloop, the starter ship, to the ship with the highest speed stat in the game, which I think is the war sloop. And so you don't have to invest loads of time or in-game gold to get more efficient. Right out of the box, you can easily travel from any island, which you'd think is a missed opportunity, but next I'm going to talk about all the different methods of travel in this game, and you'll see that it doesn't really matter. Okay, so sailing from one island to another will not take you more than 2 minutes anyway, so you'd think there's no reason for any other kind of travel. But on to travel method 2, stowing away. Stowawaying? Stowaway. You can stow away between all major settlements in the game for a very low reasonable price. I think one of the areas is quite expensive to stow away to for no real reason. The game has a handful of settlements and you can get between them for essentially free by talking to an NPC at the docks at each area. This means that, well, say if you are looking at the world map and you realise that a certain island you want to go to is on the far side of the map, you can then stow away to a settlement that is closer and then save a tiny bit of time. Method 3, teleport totems. So teleport totems are unlocked by quite grindy long quest lines. I've done a couple of them, they're not too bad, but I can imagine they get quite worse. Once you've unlocked a teleport totem, all that means is when you go onto the world map, the icon, which was previously grey at any major settlement in the game, will now be lit up green. Click the green icon and you teleport to that settlement whenever you want to. So functionally, this can get you to any major settlement in the game like stowaways, but to use stowaways you need to be at a stowaway to get to another stowaway. Whereas here, you can teleport back to a hub whenever you want to. You can be in a jungle on the far side of the map, you can be in combat, you can be doing anything, and you can just click one button and teleport to whichever settlement you want to with no cooldowns, which is really handy and relegates the stowaways function to, say, an early game only feature. And finally, one more fast travel method. Teleporting. You can teleport to any friend or guildmate for free with no cooldowns and no restrictions. It's so effortless to do this that the guild I joined even has a rule against doing it without permission, because every player in this game is so easily spatially connected that you end up disrupting people's personal space. So in this game, from my experience starting out as a new character, a few people will just add you to their friends list. It's not necessarily because they want to be friends, it's because they want free fast travel to wherever you are. Talopo has several major guilds as well, each with huge player lists and lots of active players each evening. And so if you use them too, you can get to almost wherever you want. If you want to, say, get to any island in the game, and you have to use your ship, the first method of travel, that just means you're unlucky. Travel is so unbelievably efficient in this game that if you have to spend 2 minutes sailing from one island to another, that is really slow compared to the other methods of travel, especially teleporting. And teleporting is also available from level 1 as soon as you finish the tutorial, and also has no cooldowns, as I think I said. So I think it's quite obvious that this game is taking a radically different approach to travel than, I think, any other MMO I've played. This game just does not care about space and the time it takes to cross it. And this approach has some incredibly interesting effects on how players network together. It makes social interaction in this game the easiest and most prolific of any MMO I've played. Now, as you can imagine, I played through a handful of MMOs to get the footage for this, and whilst playing the Legends of Pirates Online, I've interacted with more players in my time here than any of those other games combined. Because not only is it so easy to be with other players, but social interaction and general cooperation between players is incredibly encouraged. The best method for grinding XP and gold in this game is doing ship combat in big ship crews. So when you start out, you have the little sloop with one cannon on either side, and by the end, you're in war brigs, these massive ships with loads of cannons. I believe the size of a crew can get up to 12 players, and every evening there will be, bare minimum, at least 2 with their permissions open. One of the first things you can do is go to a dinghy, and instead of launching your own ship, you click over to the public tab and join someone else's crew. As soon as you're done teleporting to that ship, they'll probably give you a crew invite, and then you just join them on the journey. You get on the cannons and start sinking stuff. Eventually you'll sail back to a settlement and make loads of money and XP. This incredibly efficient grinding method will put you in direct contact with players. Now, you won't be as useful to the crew as, say, someone who's maxed out their cannon level, but it's not a huge difference, and I've never come across any kind of gatekeeping in the community on that regard. You can immediately start playing alongside people of all level ranges. There'll be people just starting out, people at the end game at max level, and people all in between, all encouraged to play together and all benefiting. People at the end game are usually farming gold or the chance of legendary item drops. People from any time before then are just loving the crazy amount of XP that you can get. And it made me realise that they've nailed it. This is the kind of social interaction that so many MMOs completely fail to pull off. And almost seemingly effortlessly, Pirates of the Caribbean Online did this in 2007. It just works. One other thing you may have mentioned from this footage is that there is an XP bonus that you get from grouping with other players that caps out at 50%. A 50% XP buff for playing with, I think, more than 5 other players. When thinking about this, there are 2 things going through my mind. One, the idea of XP buffs for groups is very interesting. Many MMOs, for example World of Warcraft, actually nerf your XP gains when in a group, which means that you and a group of other people can't trivialize the grind in the game by collectively annihilating all of the mobs with no difficulty. But of course that also means that if you're not being efficient and just want to play with friends, you're better off not doing that and playing solo. It's kind of a defensive design decision to nerf people trying to, I suppose, exploit the game, but I would argue has a negative effect on the everyday player. So that's the first thing. The second thing that's going through my mind is 50%, 50. Now, playing with a large group of organized people is always way more efficient in pretty much any MMO. If a lot of you group up and start killing all the mobs in an area, you're going to get through it so much faster. But to tack onto that a huge XP buff makes large group gameplay ridiculously more efficient than any other kind of gameplay. Now, the good that this does is it encourages social interaction, or well, it aggressively pushes social interaction, because if you want to be alone and not talk to people and not socialize in this game, I mean, that's a lot less XP coming your way. But this aggressive pushing is, I think, at the cost of other areas of the game. Now, as I said in the RuneScape section, I don't always necessarily want active engagement with other players. I don't mind passive engagement. I love going through Port Royal and seeing other players. I love how everyone AFKs at the same docks. It looks really cool. And I love sailing through the high seas and seeing other people's ships get into their own fights with AI. But a few times now, I've logged into this game at night and just wanted to relax and don't want to feel pressured to group up with people just to play. Because though I can play alone, and I do play alone, I feel disincentivized to do so. My favourite minigame in this game has minigames by the way, they're quite funny, is the alchemy, the potion making minigame. There have been a few times when I've gone to the potion making bench in Port Royal, realised that there's nobody else there, i.e. there's no potion making group up, and decided not to, because, I mean, that's up to 50% XP I'm missing out on. I don't want to grind when I know that I could grind for way more if there were just more people here. I'll wait, I'll just come back another time. And that coming back another time translates into me not playing the game anymore. That's kind of what happened. Now, conceptually, I started off with the idea that this video was going to be about the fact that the more social interaction a MMO has, the better it is at being an MMO. This throws a bit of a spanner in the works of that. Here's an example of it being too aggressively pushed and, for me, damaging the overall experience of the game. They're trying to buff cooperation, which is a great endeavour, but they've gone as far as to debuff being alone, and being alone is important in games like this. Now, I've not spent a significant amount of time playing this game, but I think I've gotten to grips with it, and I've not had a single negative interaction, which is saying something because this game pushes you to make many interactions, a lot more than most MMOs. And so even though I've got bad things to say about this game's experience, if you want to play a light-hearted, casual, easy to understand, easy to run MMORPG that's free and has no monetization and has a really nice community, this is definitely worth checking out. From my understanding, if you get into this game, everyone is friendly, nobody will judge you for not knowing what to do. The content is quite easy to understand, and though the update cadence of new content being added to the game maybe isn't as regular as you're used to with MMOs with huge dev teams, it's still very existent, and from my understanding, it's not weighted towards the end game at all. If you want these things, this MMO is perfect. Now, I'm not saying this will be your new World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV or whichever game you main, but sometimes what this game gives you is exactly what I'm looking for in an MMO. And it's easy and non-committal to just pick it up, try it, relax, have some fun, and then drop it back down when you're done. Okay, I'll cut the rambling short, but on screen now is a link to the website. I recommend you try it. Okay, so those were the games that I really wanted to dive deep into, but that doesn't mean I'm finished. The MMORPG genre is really diverse, and I feel like I've only really scratched the surface as to what kind of travel can be done within it. I want to start off now with Wurm Online, a sandbox MMO. Now, sandbox MMOs are not mainstream, I guess you could say, but they arguably form the most healthy part of the entire genre, at least creatively speaking. Whilst most MMO players are stuck playing the same games they've played for the past 15 odd years, there are new sandbox MMOs coming out all of the time. Very recently, Bitcraft Online released, which I played a playtest of and was very impressed by. Dune Awakening came out recently too, that's been reviewed very well, I've seen loads of people play that. PAX Day, I think, also released into early access. It seems that there are new releases all of the time. And if you're aware of what I do in this channel, you'll know that I don't really do new things, I do old things. So I'm going to step backwards in time to a game in which probably heavily influenced all of these new 2025 releases. In development for some years by a two-man team, Wurm Online launched in 2006. And to this day, it still receives updates and has a hardcore active community that's quite healthy from my understanding. You'll notice I'll probably say from my understanding quite a bit. Now, I have played this game, but it was a while ago, and I got nowhere near scratching through the surface of this game. It is incredibly deep and is incredibly time consuming to play. But I don't think you need personal experience in this game to realise that you want to experience it. Right when logging into the tutorial world, which is, I think, hundreds of kilometres squared, by the way, you get this amazing view from the top of a hilltop of the surrounding landscape. And this view distance being something that always impresses me, and the art style, this mid-2000s bloomy, colourful RPG art style, oh, I love it so much. Both of these things seem to click with me on a very intimate level. One of the first things you notice walking around is that you walk around a lot faster on roads than you do on grass. Now, this makes perfect sense, but when you've got such a huge map, the natural repercussion of this is that infrastructure is very important. People go off into their own small groups and guilds and form their own settlements, and it becomes a pretty hard requirement that they create road networks to get around the map. Those road networks will then connect with other people's road networks, and all of a sudden, everyone is networked. Networked in the most natural way I think you possibly could be in an online game. I think I've said the term networked or networking several times in this video, and it's always a bit of an abstract term, but in this instance, I think you can quite clearly see what I'm talking about. Now, things like road laying is very time consuming in this game and requires both a lot of man hours and a lot of help. And whilst performing this task, like any other task in the game, you'll increase a skill associated with that task. Now in the RuneScape section, you can see that there's all kinds of skills. There's combat skills, gathering skills, refining skills. Those are the three main categories. And any interesting thing almost you can do in the world is probably governed by a skill in some way. Well, Wurm Online takes this about 5 steps further than that. So in this game, there are a ridiculous amount of skills. Those skills usually break down into several sub-skills, and some of those will break down again into other skills. So not only do you have, let's say, a mining skill, but you will also separately have a pickaxe skill, and so on. My favourite one is that there is a toys skill for, I believe, making and playing with toys, which has a subsection for puppeteering and yo-yo. There is a separate skill you can grind in Wurm Online for yo-yoing. This list, and I'll leave a link, you can see it on their wiki page, is exhaustive. And this means that if you want to stay sane, you have to specialize. You can't try and do everything yourself. And this specialization immediately connects players together. Unless you have an ungodly amount of time on your hands, realistically you're only really going to be specializing in a few things, and so if you want to get further into the game, you need to rely on other players who are specialized in those other things and come together as a team. Now, this isn't literally related to travel, but when you think about it, if you have a world of settlements which are all connected together by roads, because they kind of have to be, where people from each settlement need to rely on people from other settlements to progress through the game, travel becomes essential, but also really fun. If player infrastructure is constantly changing and improving, and you've constantly got to use it, you must get this amazing sense of this living world that you wouldn't get from any static world in, let's say, Azeroth. Also, from my understanding, there is no form of fast travel in this game whatsoever. If you want to get around fast, you probably instead have to go talk to someone who runs a stables, and by that I mean a real person. This game has horse breeding and quite intricate animal husbandry, and so I imagine you'll need to barter or buy from them. And that creates an economy. And so you get this proper economy developing in these online societies, and it's not created with any hard incentives, but almost realistically because you can't do everything yourself. This game isn't an individual fantasy, it's a collective fantasy, shared between loads of people, most of whom you don't even know. And that, at its core, is a beautiful thing about MMOs, and I think Wurm does it really well. Now, from my understanding, the game doesn't have a huge population anymore, but it's certainly not dead either. And if you're in the mood for something different, something like this, I recommend you try it. Also, one of the 2 people that made this game back in 2006 is Notch, who later went on to create Minecraft, and you can see a creative through line there. Something I completely forgot to mention about Wurm Online is the fact that you can travel from server to server in-game. Wurm has shipbuilding, which is one of the few things I actually managed to accomplish years ago when I played this game. And if you and a bunch of people get in a big ship, fill yourself with supplies, and sail off to the edge of the map, you can travel to other servers in that server cluster. Entire continents full of guilds, communities, roads, all of it. You can just sail over and interact with those people, maybe trade with them, get some supplies, or just explore, and then head back home. I think that's really cool. Usually traveling across servers is a one-time fee, but in this game it's a game mechanic. I don't know if that's happening in any other games ever. Mechanics like this need to be remembered in the hope that one day they'll be implemented again. When I started this video, I knew I somewhere had to mention Guild Wars 2 because it is renowned both collectively on the internet and also by personal friends who spent time with the game as the game with the best mounts. And of course, mounts are very important to travel. What you're seeing right now is me leveling a character. I've not really played this game since the beta. That's how long ago I played Guild Wars 2. And that was way before mounts were added, I think. And you know what? After experiencing it myself with the starter mount, they're right. The mounts just feel great to use. Now, I really did want to get my hands on some other mounts, but those required me to buy expansions and grind loads, and for the purpose of this video, the video is long enough already, so I didn't want to go grind through an entire MMO just to check out some mounts. But I do believe it when people say that the mounts are great in this game. And if I'm ever asked, how should mounts feel in a game, I'll just point to this. Though I've not spent a huge amount of time in this game, as I've said, I'm just going to trust the online communities who talk about this game when they say that these are pretty much the best in the business. Though, if you disagree and know of any alternative MMOs that are in the run-up for best mounts, please leave a comment. I'd actually like to hear about that. As for how travel works in general in Guild Wars 2 though, there is a bit more to talk about. And I think Guild Wars 2 is right at, I guess, the meta for fast travel nowadays in modern MMOs. So you've got your three kinds. You've got number one, which is walking around, which is fine for combat objectives. You've got number two, which are mounts. They're really good at getting from engagement to engagement or between point of interests in subsections of zones. But then there's the third, which is just straight up teleporting. In this game, you can just pay a pretty modest sum of money and teleport to fast travel hubs anywhere in the game, and there are loads of them. If you want to get anywhere, you can get there really, really efficiently if you've been there before by just opening the map, which looks amazing, by the way. I think Guild Wars 2 has my favourite world map of any MMO ever. But you can just click on any of these markers, go wherever you want, and it's done. Most travel in Guild Wars 2 is fast travel. And when you want to get from A to B, it's arguably uncommon that fast traveling won't take you there faster. I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. I mean, the world map does a great job of establishing the scale of the world, but when you're actually traveling around in it, that scale kind of gets lost because you just teleport everywhere. The fun of using these mounts shouldn't be understated, but neither should this game's focus on efficiency. Though mounts are way cooler than loading screens will ever be, they're less efficient in this game, and I think it takes a hit in that regard. And I'm not necessarily just talking about Guild Wars 2, I believe that this is the formula nowadays. Elder Scrolls Online, for example, is exactly the same as this, but with more boring mounts and a more boring world, From my understanding, Final Fantasy XIV works just like this. Today's World of Warcraft works this same way as well, only they've retained a bit of their older flight mastery features. It's not all just straight loading screens, but it's the same idea. This is the modern formula for travel around game worlds. And after everything I've been through in this video, I find it lacking. The purpose of travel in these games is to get you from A to B, and that's almost it. Travel in of itself is not seen as an activity, it's just seen as the time between one activity to another. And so whilst I don't necessarily see anything wrong with travel in games like this, it could be so much more right. I've also got some honourable mentions. A relatively new game that's released, Throne and Liberty, has a travel method where you turn into various animals. That's a cool idea. New World added mounts relatively recently. From my understanding, they're very easy to obtain, but you need to buy an expansion to get them. That's not a good idea. Space MMOs, predominantly EVE Online, have travel. They scare me though, and I have no idea what's going on, so I couldn't tell you much about it. Sorry. And Escape from Tarkov, which is only an MMORPG by certain people's definitions, has recently added in a new labyrinth level, which is a separate instance only accessed from another instance. Not entirely sure if it fits in here. I just wanted to bring up how instance-based games can handle travel in interesting ways. Though I do feel a bit exhausted, I know that this list I've just been over of MMOs is not exhaustive. Meaning that I've missed stuff, interesting stuff about interesting games that deserve to be a part of this conversation that I just don't know about or have forgotten. So please do, if you think I've missed something, leave a comment and tell us about it. Tell us about these games and the fast travel systems within them that could add to this conversation. But anyway, I've been talking about loads of different games, some of which you've probably never heard of, and it's distanced this video away from the fact that this is predominantly a World of Warcraft channel. So let's circle back to where we started this video and have a look at World of Warcraft. So, after spending varying amounts of time doing all different kinds of travel in lots of different MMOs, it's time to go back to World of Warcraft, where this video and this channel both started. And after learning what we have about travel in these games, reevaluate exactly what WoW does right and wrong, what it's just okay at, and with inspiration from these previous games we've looked at, I've got some ideas of how WoW could change its travel to be more interesting or better, or enhance the game's social experience. So then, let's start right at the most basic form of travel. Walking, or well, you're kind of jogging in this game, aren't you? Everything around you is scaled up massively. I first noticed this in Northshire and Elwyn Forest, where all the trees are scaled up massively. Now, I've since learned that this is because back in the day, lots of little trees would lag out the game a lot more. And though this game released in the mid-2000s, they had to consider people playing the game with computers from the 90s. It also contrasts really interestingly from Warcraft 3. In Warcraft 3, all the player characters and non-player characters are hugely scaled up, and the buildings are scaled down, which makes sense for the genre. And something's size can often indicate its importance. In RTS games, buildings are just something you click on to train units or research technologies, whereas the units in Warcraft 3, for example, are a lot bigger because they're incredibly important and you need to be able to see them from high above in a bird's eye view. On the other hand, in World of Warcraft, the entire world is so much bigger than you. And I don't just think that's a quirky aesthetic choice or done for performance reasons. I think it's because the world is supposed to be bigger than you in this game, in more than just the physical world. When playing this game, you are not the main character. You're just a tiny imprint on Azeroth. And it's together that people can make a difference. Now, because you're a tiny person in a big world, this means it takes ages to get around from one place to another. And this necessitates the Flight Masters, which I'll talk about later, mounts, which I'll also talk about later, and speed buffs. So some classes have access to ways to buff their speed. Druids can unlock their various travel forms, which are really cool, and they can hot swap between them to always get the most speed out of whatever terrain they're going through. Mages can blink, and rogues have sprint, where they sacrifice a bit of their energy for a lot of movement speed for a small amount of time. Priests eventually learn a spell to both levitate and walk on water, which is really useful in select circumstances. And over the years and expansions, I think all of the classes now have some kind of extra mobility ability. And I nearly forgot that you can also get speed buffs from consumable items, like speed potions or the Noggenfogger elixir, which when you drink it has a chance of doing one of three things. Either giving you the same slowfall effect that a priest's levitate ability would, turning you to a skeleton so that you no longer breathe and so then can be underwater as long as you want, or it can also shrink you, which doesn't help at all. This kind of stuff is welcomed and is also frankly needed just because of the sheer size of the world. Now, a lot of the time you won't feel like a road is going on for too long, sometimes it'll feel just about right, but there are some experiences, like for example in Elwyn Forest. The first few times I had to take my first trip from, say, Goldshire to Lakeshire, it was really interesting and it was a cool journey. Eventually, though, it can get a bit exhausting. It is essentially a long, straight road that takes several minutes to cross, with nothing interesting happening whatsoever along the way. It was a problem that was left unsolved, but pretty well patched over with the Flight Master system. Sure, this long road is boring and quite featureless, but you'll only ever need to make it once per character, because once you've unlocked the Flight Master at Lakeshire, you can fly to and fro whenever you want. I will say though that whilst the scale of the world can sometimes lead to some boring straight roads, sometimes it very often doesn't. For example, I'm a huge fan of, say, the dwarven tunnels throughout the dwarven leveling zones that go through the mountains, making excellent use of the terrain in a way that perfectly fits the culture of people living there. And there are some places like Mulgore where the vast open stretch of nothing greatly enhances the feel of that zone as opposed to taking away from anything. Let's go upper level, to mounts. Originally, the basic mounts were unlocked at level 40, and the full speed mounts were unlocked at level 60. They increase your speed whilst travelling considerably, and the newfound speed makes the size of the world feel more reasonable. But despite having no real combat advantage, mounts are perhaps the most significant upgrade your character will ever get, and will cut down on the downtime to get from one place to another considerably. And this definitely does feel alleviating, because by the time you're level 40 and then 60, you've gone from A to B several times over and know these roads like the back of your hand. So a significant increase to speed feels great. To balance how great this is, the prices are astronomical. And one of the true achievements of officially and properly achieving the mid and late games is to get your level 40 and level 60 mounts. It's great for player identity, and of course for speed. So with all of Azeroth networked by these huge road systems and everyone's got really fast mounts to zoom around on, you'd expect to see constant traffic, but you don't. And that's because usually until the last leg of their journey, most players will save so much more time by just taking a flight master. In each of World of Warcraft zones, there is at least one flight master, usually at a major settlement. If you haven't talked to a flight master before, they'll have a green exclamation mark above their head. And once you do, you'll unlock them. The flight masters of the game knit together to create a transit network, which you can always see when you right-click on them. If you've unlocked two different flight masters that are on the same network, you can use the network to travel from one end to another. All it costs you is a bit of silver and a bit of time. And once you've been to the flight master and picked your route, you're just taken off. There's no player interaction to be done whatsoever. It's an automated travel route and you can go AFK. It's a great win for efficiency over the slog that travelling on foot can sometimes be. In World of Warcraft, players are all around you. You just need to look up. I do have a lot more to say about the Flight Master, and I will do in the conclusion of this video. But now I want to move on and talk about public transport, including, most importantly, the Deep Run Tram. Excluding the Deep Run Tram, which takes you underground from Stormwind to Ironforge, this game's transport is a way to get from one of the continents to another, using either the ferries that will sail across the ocean, or the zeppelins which fly across in the air. On the outside looking in, it seems a bit strange as to why I would enjoy it so much. I mean, you just wait a while for it to arrive, and then with other players you enter on board, and then you just wait a while longer while it's sailing or flying or whatever, and then you just get off when it's done and you're at your destination. But it's the fact that you're alongside other people which transforms this from just an AFK flying session into what it is. The amount of times I've gone to a ship at Menethil Harbour to take me westwards and been part of some small conversation, or just listened in on someone else's conversation, or looked around at different players to see what guilds they're in and recognised them because I played in a dungeon from them and we maybe exchanged a wave. All of that good stuff, the magic that holds this game together for me, is happening predominantly on ferries and the Deep Run Tram. Okay, so when I was talking about Guild Wars 2, I kind of established these three modes of travel, where you've got walking, mounts, and fast travel. We've kind of gotten to that last section now with World of Warcraft, so let's talk about instantaneous fast travel. And let's start with something quite niche, summoning stones. Originally, these summoning stones, or as known on the wiki apparently, meeting stones, were actually the game's first looking for group tool, posted outside of each instance in the game. If you interacted with one of these stones, it could put you into a group with other people that have done the same thing. And I think if you're talking to an innkeeper, you could also do the same thing. So you could get quickly match made into a random group. Now the problem is, this system had no controls like selecting the right role. You could end up with 4 healers and 1 DPS, because there was no way you could interact with these people before joining the party to find out if you're a good fit for their group, either personally or composition-wise. They were really quite useless and I don't think were ever used, and so with the release of the Burning Crusade expansion, they were changed into what we know them as today, where they will instead be used to summon players in the same group. If you have, I believe, 2 or more players at the meeting stone, you can summon other members of your group to you. Meaning that if you've been waiting for a healer for ages and you finally find one, but they're in Stormwind and you're at Razorfen Crawl, you don't need to wait a good, 20-ish, 30 minutes for them to get there. You can just teleport them right there, and that saves so much time when looking for a group. This is a really useful tool that I don't think anyone would want to do without in a game like this. But at the same time, in my first video, I went over the journey of a paladin doing their Verigan's Fist questline for the first time. It is an incredibly important story to me and how I experienced the game for the first time. And if my pilgrimage to Shadowfang Keep were skipped by being summoned by a stone, I mean, this channel wouldn't have existed. I likely wouldn't have fell in love with World of Warcraft in the way that I did. One of my favourite experiences wouldn't have happened because I would have just teleported. So if fast travel does exist in this game, instantaneous travel where the only thing stopping you from A to B is a loading screen, why is everyone flying around all day? Why not just use the instantaneous travel? And that's because, aside from summoning stones, which we've just talked about, it's handled almost entirely around class abilities. And I think that this is a great implementation of fast travel, similarly to EverQuest. Pretty much all of the major settlements in the game can be teleported to through a portal created by a mage. As they level up more, they unlock the spells to create different portals to different areas, and if you're at any point playing the game with a mage, you will make great use of this. Every single raid night, when everything's been cleared, the first thing that happens is a mage is asked to make a portal, and all 25 or 40 people filter into it and back to the capital city of their faction. Or if a dungeon group forms to go to a certain dungeon but they're all on the wrong continent, they can all just get together, and if there's a mage in that group, they can just be teleported over there. Does it take people off of all the game's roads? Yes. Does it take people off of the Deep Run tram? Yes. But it's what it adds in place of that which makes it incredibly valuable, and that is reliance on other players. And when you have mages or warlocks with their summoning system, not only do you make sure that there will always be a demand for a mage and a warlock, but also if you play a mage or a warlock, you'll always feel needed, and that's a great thing to feel in an online game like this. And it's this texture behind a fast travel ability which changes it from, I don't know, just teleporting anywhere you want like in Guild Wars 2, to the teleporting and summoning of World of Warcraft. I think that fast travel as a concept is perfectly fine, but I think it needs to be implemented very carefully and as a means to amplify the social aspect of the game, as opposed to just being a tool of pure efficiency at the cost of everything else. Okay, so I'm thoroughly ranted out on fast travel at this point, but I do need to bring up Hearthstones. So if you don't know, you set your Hearthstone to any inn in the game, and then you can teleport back there wherever you want on, I think it was originally an hour cooldown, and it's gotten down to something like a 20-minute cooldown, I think, in modern versions of the game. So I think those are the fundamentals of World of Warcraft in its original state, or perhaps the state that it's now in WoW Classic and Season of Discovery, or in a lot of the vanilla plus private servers that are around today. But changes were made, incredibly heavy changes were made to World of Warcraft over the years, so I want to talk about some of those too. A very major change to travel actually came in the first expansion for the game, quite early on, and that was with flying in the Burning Crusade. Just as land mounts were an endgame time and money sink for vanilla World of Warcraft, flying mounts served the same purpose in the Burning Crusade. Now, I don't remember the details of the lore in this expansion, but essentially you're floating through space with the shards of what once was a planet. And this floating island, called Outland, houses an incredibly diverse selection of zones. And in my opinion, the ultimate reward upon completion, let's say, of this expansion at level 70 is the ability to fly around them. Whilst leveling from 60 to 70, these zones play out just as any others will. You've got roads that take you from one settlement to the other, you've got flight masters which take you to other flight masters. I'm pretty sure mages get a spell to teleport to the main city, which this time is shared between the game's two factions. But when you start flying, it opens up an entire new dimension to how the game is played. Each zone will have at least one thing interesting that you could never get to without something with two wings. And there's a couple of whole sub-areas that are completely locked until you get to level 17 and can fly up there. Back when I played the Burning Crusade Classic, I do a lot of nighttime fishing for my guild, and some of the best fish can be found up here. It was in equal parts interesting and irritating to see as more of the player base progressively unlocked flying, it got harder and harder to meet my fishing quota. And outside of unlocking a lot of stuff that's interesting, flying mounts are just incredibly useful. Outland's terrain is just as, if not more, dominated by mountains than Azeroth is back in the game's original world. And so to be able to just get loads of altitude and go in a straight line across it all, not only looks great the first few times you do it, but it's also incredibly more efficient. The Burning Crusade introduced lots of dailies for professions, and I couldn't imagine doing those dailies every day using a flight master. So there are many good things to say about flying, and it makes a lot of sense that once World of Warcraft's mounts got off the ground, they never looked back. But I do have problems with flying, and so I believe does a lot of the older World of Warcraft community. Though flying is interesting and fun, it has some of the same problems that the flight masters have, that they override and invalidate other forms of travel, and in the case of flying, it invalidates all other forms of travel, bar perhaps warlock summons, or of course the Hearthstone. Why walk anywhere or use any of the world's public infrastructure if you can fly? Why hop on a horse if you can fly? Why use a flight master when you can fly yourself? As soon as a character reached level 70 and got their first flying mount, you'd never see them again, outside of Shatrath City maybe, the game's main hub. At least with flight masters, everyone was along the same trail and you could often wave or even have conversations with people in the air. And during raid time, it looked like one long train of birds all going out at the same time. Which, now I think about it, I think it's one of my favourite phenomena in this game. Being by the bridge in Stormwind, and as soon as the raid buff goes off, perhaps hundreds of people all stream out of the Flightmaster at once, north towards Molten Core or some other place. A couple of weeks or so into playing the Burning Crusade Classic, a lot of the roads on my server emptied out. Sure, of course, there were still people leveling, and sometimes in select areas you would see a level 70 go to perform a certain specific task. But this feeling of being together with everyone else isn't just damaged in the Burning Crusade, I feel like it's gone. And though guilds, for example, smaller communities, thrived during this expansion and the expansions after, from my understanding, over the years, more and more features have been added to the game to get people playing together. But when it comes to the community, capital C community, I didn't feel it like I did before. And sadly, when it comes to travel in World of Warcraft, this is almost the end of its story. The next expansion, the Wrath of the Lich King, continued along this trend. You had flying locked whilst leveling, but then at the end game, after a large gold sink, you could unlock flying again and fly around Northrend, the new continent. Now I am glad that flying had to be unlocked separately for each expansion, because that meant that players leveling could really soak in the world and atmosphere. And so at least at the start of an expansion, the roads would be full of players, but I don't see that population on the ground holding up as the weeks went on. Northrend did have some interesting ferry routes though, and it had quite a lot of elevators, which in a way I guess are vertical deep run trams, so I guess we kind of got there a bit. Past Wrath of the Lich King, my knowledge of this game dwindles quite significantly. So I am sorry if I missed anything, and I'd actually be really interested in hearing what those things are if they exist, so please do leave a comment. Though I do know that in Warlords of Draenor, the expansion infamous for a huge amount of cut content, originally a train line was planned in Gorgrond. It is crazy to me to think that it took this long for them to implement some kind of proper public transport in World of Warcraft. And I feel like with the technological setting of this game, you could easily fit a few in. The train actually did make it into the game, but only as part of an instance dungeon. And it feels really weird how this constant Western movie-style scrolling background juxtaposes against, well, this game being an open-world game. Another quite recent change to travel in World of Warcraft is dragon flying. In the Dragonflight expansion, you got the ability to have your own dragon that massively expands the flight controls in this game. Now you can drop down to gain momentum and then use power-ups like twisting around in the air or boosting forward. Previously, flying in this game is just as basic as any other kind of movement. You just WASD and spacebar. But dragon flying does something that World of Warcraft has never done and should have done, and that's turn travel into an activity in of itself. It is really fun just flying around on a dragon in this game. And there's lots of little challenges to do which remind me of Spyro or Quidditch from Harry Potter on the PS1. Because it's such a great augment to flying, they later added it to all flying mounts, which is a great decision. And from my understanding, it's regarded as one of the best things that Blizzard have done in recent years. It does have its problems though, the same problems that normal flying had. Because it's way more efficient than almost all other kinds of travel, you never see anyone partake in any other kinds of travel. Each time something like this is added, it feels great, but it inches the experience away from what it originally was, and there's been so many inches since the game came out now that it's practically a mile away from what it used to be. As well as being fun, it's also a lot faster than normal flying. And so, at least from what I've been told when I asked a friend, the speed of dragon flying means that people don't even use flight masters anymore. Everything runs at a snail's pace compared to dragon flying, and so why bother? I can only see it having a very negative effect on the overall social experience, the kind that I play older versions of the game for. But frankly, I can't say that because of any of this, any changes need to be made, because frankly, modern World of Warcraft is a different kind of game for a different kind of audience. People play the game very differently. This social sandbox that I keep talking about with rose-tinted glasses is long gone really in modern iterations of the game, overtaken by lots of solo and small group content and well-functioning, but from my understanding quite insular guild communities. The player base of the game on a realm-wide scale no longer seems to really be a consideration in the philosophy of this game's design. And so criticizing the game for not considering it doesn't seem very appropriate. But anyway, that's me done talking about World of Warcraft. Because next I'm going to conclude, and using all of the things I've talked about from all the previous games, try to properly articulate why I care so much about travel in MMOs, why I think you should if you're an MMO player, what makes good travel, and why travel makes a game good. I'll be using vanilla World of Warcraft as a base for these conclusions and adding lots of suggestions within the context of that world, mostly because it's the world I know the most about and the world I imagine you viewers will know the most about. So let's get started. Okay, so why is travel so important in games like this? I wanted to make a statement about how it's the glue that holds the game together, and I do think that's true, but there's more to it than that. It's more than just glue, it's substance in of itself. I think that travel goes in hand with the concept of the journey, and the journey is central to fantasy. The most stereotypical example of this, I guess, is The Lord of the Rings. The through line of the entire story is travelling from one place to another. And sure, there is a destination and objective for the journey to take place, but the vast majority of things that happen in the book are activities that sprout from the journey. They aren't independent activities. And playing some modern MMOs, or well, modern games in general, can give the feeling that you're, for example, watching the movie trilogy and just skipping to all the action scenes. Sure, the action is fun, but the backbone of fantasy is this journey. And when fantasy gets translated into video games, I think the same becomes true. Also, to go back to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it was being released right around the time of World of Warcraft's development. And I think taking that into account, it's quite obvious that the developers of the game wanted you to have your own fellowship and your own adventures in this huge world. I think that this idea is quite integral to World of Warcraft, but also I don't think it was properly realised. Another reason I think that travel is important is because it's a dynamic sandbox with other people. A Dungeons & Dragons campaign, for example, is, to a greater or lesser extent, an orchestrated experience. Most of the time when playing tabletop games, you're playing through a pre-planned campaign, where there can be lots of creativity on exactly how it's done, but the same thing must get done. There is a world to explore, but it almost exists entirely within the context of the story that's trying to be told. And I'm quite comfortable with calling World of Warcraft's quest lines campaigns too. But what that doesn't take into account is the other players, who you can never predict, at least in a narrative sense. This turns the RPG into an entirely dynamic sandbox experience between other people. Everyone is having their own adventures, and they all intertwine with each other. And I think that this is the primary function of an MMORPG. to create these social situations and amazing adventures. And so I suppose you could say that it has a duty to enhance that experience and to bring it out wherever it can be found within the game world. The MMORPG has a duty to the journey, and the journey is made what it is by the quality of travel in the game. Now, not all MMO players are the same. They're not all trying to roleplay as hobbits. Some people are entirely mechanically focused. All they care about are raids, gear, talent points, numbers, coefficients. Some people have no idea what any of that means and just want to have fun. And so, because there's so many different groups of people playing this game and its diversity in its player base is a great thing, I can only really say that travel is so important to me and to people who treat the game similarly to I do. But I do think that regardless as to what your priorities are, better travel creates a better experience. And even if you don't appreciate the journey of a game like this, it's much better to have a journey that appreciates you, the player. So, sprouting from some criticisms of World of Warcraft and many MMOs like it, I'm going to offer some suggestions as to how things could be implemented or changed, stuff like that. But I do want to mention a couple of things. Number one is that though I'm talking a lot about the journey, I don't necessarily think that the longer said journey is, the better. In fact, honestly, I don't really have a problem with the length of the journey in any of the MMOs I've covered today. For example, if you've never played Skyrim without fast travel, I do recommend it. There's some really good mods to overhaul that experience, to really squeeze more out of the world. I know this isn't a video about Elder Scrolls games, but so much detail of Bethesda's open worlds are missed because you can teleport everywhere. It's a bit of a travesty. But I don't think that's necessary at all for MMOs like World of Warcraft. The second thing, and I did say this earlier, is that I'm just using World of Warcraft, specifically the vanilla version, as a basis to then build off of, to then explore what travel could be like in any similar kind of MMORPG. For all I know, some of these things could have been implemented in later versions of World of Warcraft, and I am in no way making a demand for Blizzard to make any of these changes. I am nowhere near confident enough in my opinions to say that this is what Classic Plus should look like. I'm just here to explore ideas, and I want to explore them with you. And so, whilst I'm incredibly happy to receive any criticisms or, any discussion on this topic in the comments, please do know that this isn't necessarily a manifesto. This is just me daydreaming. So typically in the previous sections of this video, each time I've taken a look at an MMO, I've started with the most basic forms of travel and then advanced further and further with, let's say, walking on one end and teleporting on another. This time though, it feels right to start at the top and work my way down. So let's start by talking about fast travel in World of Warcraft. At some earlier point in the video, I said that fast travel inherently damages the sense of scale in the world and that this is a bad thing. And this is completely true. But I now view scale as just an ingredient to create the experience needed for a game like this. And sometimes it's okay sacrificing scale if it brings another advantage in a different way. And I think that's how fast travel fundamentally should work. It should be there if there's a good reason for it. It shouldn't be there purely for the sake of efficiency. And let's start with meeting stones, the smallest form of fast travel, so easily forgotten. Several times over the years, I've had to wait for a tank or healer for about 15-20 minutes, depending on how long they wanted to take, as I'm waiting in Scarlet Monastery for them to arrive from Stormwind, and it's very painful, and meeting stones just makes that go away. And for that reason, I think that the change that was made to them in the Burning Crusade, where you can summon people, is great. And the problem I do have with the implementation is that first journey to Shadowfang Keep as an Alliance player, or that first journey to Scarlet Monastery as an Alliance player, may never be had. And that was such a formative experience for me playing WoW for the first time that players just might not get. And that's kind of painful for me, the idea that other people will have no idea what I'm talking about. And I'm sure Horde players have their own equivalents. I'm assuming Deadmines is painful to get to as a low-level Horde player. These trials, painful as they are though, are a great journey to embark on. And I don't like the idea of any players being robbed of that. And a lot like, say, the waypoints in Guild Wars 2, I think that the summoning feature should only work if someone's been to that dungeon before. And maybe it should be account-wide instead of character-wide. This way, people can go on these epic journeys, some of the best journeys I've ever had playing the game, and yet still also not get really frustrated when trying to grind Scarlet Armory for Herod's equipment and not finding people. and having to wait half an hour for a group to assemble, and getting killed by Horde repeatedly outside the monastery. And whilst I haven't given it a huge amount of thought, maybe a similar thing could be implemented for settlements in the game. If, let's say, your group is waiting for you in the middle of a jungle somewhere, in a small village, maybe there could be a meeting stone there too, as long as they've trekked over to that remote place before themselves. An item which everyone has that provides the opposite function of a meeting stone is a hearthstone, which will take you back home. And I think that though it's important to be wary of instantaneous travel methods, the hearthstone is too important to get rid of because sometimes you just want to go home. This being said though, I do think that if you can bind your hearthstone to a remote inn in the middle of nowhere, then this place is no longer remote. And to preserve this idea that some places are much further away from civilization than others, and this feeling that you can be very far from home, I think that binding your hearthstone should only really be to major settlements. And that missing utility from the hearthstone should be replaced by what I want to talk about next: evacuate spells. I think that really the hearthstone is a massive oversimplification of the ability to evacuate from an area like in EverQuest. Instead of just having one item that does the job, I think that many classes should have many ways to get out of their current situation. For example, I think that rogues should be able to use some kind of sneak ability to get to the entrance of that instance or subzone to get out of combat quickly on a long cooldown. I think that priests should be able to use something like Divine Intervention, and I don't mean the Paladin spell, I mean the spell from Morrowind that teleports you to the nearest religious site. Maybe a small handful of new shrines would have to be placed throughout the world to make this make sense, but I think it would provide a inconvenient, yes, but very effective way of getting out of danger. Sure, you won't be taken straight home, but the spell will do its job of taking you out of your current situation, and I think a lot of the time that's what you want from a hearthstone. You don't necessarily want the full power of being able to go wherever you've bound yourself. You just want to, let's say, leave BRD. I think that Paladins should also have a very similar version of this spell, but instead it's about sacrificing themselves to help other people get away instead of themselves. And that maybe then Paladins can somehow use it on each other, and then another class has to be the one to help the Paladin get away. And I think this kind of evacuation type spell can expand more into general travel too. I talked about in the EverQuest section how I really liked the idea of these druidic areas, these druid circles, and how you can teleport from one to another. And kind of like warlocks summoning people to places, I think the druids could provide a great service like they do in EverQuest. I think that what currently exists for mages and warlocks works great, and that something similar to that should exist for some of the other classes as well. But I do also want to stress that I don't think this kind of travel should be terribly efficient. I think that most of these shrines or druid circles should be in the middle of nowhere, and you shouldn't be taken to the nearest hub, you should be kind of stranded. Using one of these evacuate spells should be more so an emergency button than a get out of jail free card. Unless you're lucky, let's say, and you're in a zone where the people who live in the area have a druidic tradition or worship the light in some way. If you're in those kind of environments, maybe these spells are incredibly useful. And that connection to the game world, I think, definitely excuses if this kind of fast travel may be too efficient at times and take you exactly where you want to go. And I think it also creates a bit of an efficiency puzzle, like in RuneScape, which is the thing I love about RuneScape's travel. There are so many varied and diverse methods of travel that it takes a great amount of game knowledge to know the best way from one place to another. And so, although many of these druid circles, for example, could ditch you in the middle of a forest, maybe you will know from experience that evacuating there now will technically save you time over taking another travel route. And it's that kind of knowledge that gives this feeling that you've mastered the world, because you can traverse it very efficiently despite how diverse the travel is. And this principle will also apply to some of the other stuff I'm about to talk about. And maybe there should be just a little bit of fast travel in the game that's just weird for the sake of being weird. The first thing I can think of is just pulling the levers in RuneScape, and they will just take you to a place in the wilderness where there's a huge chance you'll get murdered. There's this funny interaction where it just asks you, are you really sure you want to do this? And of course, curiosity is going to get the better of you, and you end up in the middle of nowhere and probably get killed. I love stuff like that. I think there should be a very similar button to press somewhere outside of Gnomeregan that will take you into the middle of the burning steppes. And stuff like this in small doses is quirky and funny, but also perhaps if you're playing at the end game, can actually be used as proper travel. In RuneScape, a very efficient way to quickly get to the wilderness to get your stuff done is through pulling one of those levers. So maybe experienced players will find out that going over to Gnomeregan and pressing that button is a faster way to get to Blackrock Mountain than, let's say, flying in. And stuff like that's really cool. The closest I've seen in World of Warcraft is in Season of Discovery. I think it was a Paladin quest, but may have been shared by other classes, where you have to use this teleporter in Booty Bay and it takes you up onto this plateau in Thousand Needles. Now, it's primarily just for that quest, but after you finish the quest, the teleporter remains active. And I wasn't really creative enough to think of this, but if you have that teleporter unlocked, that's incredibly efficient travel over to Feralus, which if you're an Alliance player is one of the most isolated zones in the game from your faction. Again, I think that all of these things, the shrines, the druid circles, the magic buttons, all of this stuff can be overdone, and so I wouldn't want to see it everywhere. It should be enough to introduce a lot of diversity to the travel and to spruce areas up, and make them feel special depending on how many quests you've completed on the area, your faction rep maybe, and of course, as I've been speaking about, your class. Fast travel should be implemented to spice things up, to make things interesting, but it should stop there, so that whilst getting around the world, people can actually see it instead of a loading screen. In unique circumstances, stuff like this can be uniquely interesting. Okay, next I want to go down a stage and talk about what I like to call automated transport, which in WoW terms means the flight masters. And flight masters, I think, are the worst part about World of Warcraft's travel. One, because all automated transport in this game is via flight masters. It's just flapping around on big birds all day. And two, because its efficiency invalidates some of the later forms of travel that we're going to talk about. And so I want to talk about how to fix these two problems. They fly over all of the game's many mountains, and do so with absolutely no input from the player. With a world so big, it's perfect to find some downtime. Especially at the end game, you're going to find yourself traveling up and down the continents all the time, and so if you ever need to get anything done around the house, need to tab out, check something on your other monitor, watch a Vverian video, you can pair all of that perfectly with Flightmaster flying. And this amazing convenience should never be ignored or dismantled. But it's the Flightmaster's other trait that I think should be criticised, and that's its pure efficiency. Outside, of course, being able to teleport somewhere, flying around in the sky is the best way to get anywhere. And I touched on this a bit previously when talking about World of Warcraft specifically. If you make a form of travel the most convenient and the most efficient, what chance does any other form of travel have? And for this reason, I think that Flightmasters should be slower, or perhaps even other forms of travel should be faster. It's perfect to have this network of travel where you can get wherever you want while being AFK, just flying over the world. I think that traveling manually should be rewarded. It should be faster. If I'm flying, let's say, from Orgrimmar to Silithus because I want to go and make some food or something, I should be able to do that because it's such a huge world. I need downtime. But if I just want to get there, I should be able to saddle up and get there first. And if I don't want to have all of this downtime, I shouldn't be punished for wanting to not use a Flightmaster. If I want to actually engage with the game and be at my desk and be at my keyboard, that should be a reward and not just feel really boring if I'm flying anywhere. And when I am traveling around on a Flightmaster, things should be so much more interesting, and this is getting on to the second problem. There is a complete lack of diversity in this system in that it's just flying around. The fast travel network should connect to, I don't know, maybe small rowing boats, where some AI will row for you if you pay them a bit of money. And this should be automated just in the way that when you go from one side of the continent to another, you automatically connect to that network of Flightmasters and hop from node to node. The same could definitely be done on, let's say, horseback, like in Lord of the Rings Online, where you can get this travel between certain way stations and stables instead of just flying. Maybe it's a courier service, and instead of having to spend a bit of silver to travel, you're paid a bit of silver. Automated travel is very important for a game like this, and a world this big. And it should stay just as accommodating for people that want to go AFK, whilst also staying respectful to other forms of transport, like this next one I'm going to talk about, which is my favourite, social transport. This is the name that I've given to stuff like the Deep Run Tram and ferries, and I guess to a very limited extent, elevators? Though these themselves are, of course, automated in their own way, players can't automate their interaction with them, which is the key difference. Another key difference is that whilst automated transport is on demand and private, social transport works on a schedule and is shared with other people. And the reason why I love this kind of transport the most, the reason why I love the Deep Run tram, is because when you're on this transport with other people, you're placed in a bubble with those people. When I talked about RuneScape earlier, I talked about active and passive player interaction, and I believe that the Deep Run tram and things like it are perfect instigators of passive social interaction. This passive social experience you have on social transport has a great effect on the journeys that everyone goes on in this game together. And though some types of players will see this as far more or less tangible than others of an idea, I do think it is incredibly important, and it's the crux of me starting to talk about all of this stuff in the first place. Right now, there is the Deep Run tram, which takes you from Stormwind to Ironforge. There are zeppelins, which typically take you from one horde area to another, and ferries, which typically take you from one alliance area to another, or between neutral goblin settlements. And there just aren't very many of them. Now, you need to use one if you want to go from one continent to another. They're a great immersive way of masking a loading screen. Now, I don't think that this should mean that there should be significantly more trams, ferries or zeppelins, but I think that the current ones should maybe be expanded. When using Black Desert Online's ferry system, I really got the feeling that I was travelling to some unknown place, far away from the comforts of home. And whilst perhaps there is a bit of that with zeppelins, for example, I feel like it should be expanded upon so much more. Perhaps the Deep Run tram, after going south to Stormwind, should keep going to the south or maybe east to some smaller dwarven outpost. And to the north past Ironforge, I mean, that's where the whole dwarven kingdom is. There should be at least one more stop in that direction. I think it would make sense if pretty much all of the goblin settlements in this game were connected by some kind of zeppelin or ferry. There are several goblin settlements all along eastern Kalimdor, and it would make a lot of sense if they were connected in some way. What I think is perhaps the most important consideration when thinking about travel in a game like this is that one form of travel doesn't invalidate the other. That's a problem seen in so many of the games I've covered in this video. But I think that if any form of travel has the right to do that, it's social transport because of the things that it puts back into the game experience. There's also some other forms of it that could be explored. For example, earlier I was complaining about the long, quite boring road between Goldshire and Lakeshire. A private server for World of Warcraft, Project Epoch, which is launching imminently around the time of the release of this video, I think, has actually solved this problem with a carriages system. In several zones in the game, there are carriages. There's a couple of carriages riding back and forth along Elwyn's long roads, and they make stops at the settlements, and I think around 6 players can get in the back and travel together. And during that time, you're all facing each other, and that's the perfect time whilst leveling to socialize and meet new people. I think each race could probably get something like this contextual to their culture. For example, the undead could get, some Victorian-style carriages instead with a spooky lantern on top, something like that. And when it comes to dwarves, I think it's ludicrous they've got no rail systems along their road network. There should definitely be some little train or something like that chewing along. Now, in the earlier game, this would make travel way easier, because as you start out in World of Warcraft, you're near the capitals of your races, and so you're near a lot more infrastructure. But then as you play the game and you start exploring the faraway reaches, like dense jungles or places long ago overrun with undead, you're going to see a complete lack of that infrastructure and have to rely on more creative ways to get around efficiently. I also think that there should be a couple of instances of just trying to have fun with travel. Like maybe there's a ghost ship of some old Kultiran sailors that appears at the wetlands every now and then, and if you manage to get on it, it will speed you along to a load of different places in the world before disappearing. It could be a rare spawn that doesn't necessarily need to provide a proper method of travel, but should just be a cool convenience for the people that happen to be there at the time. Maybe the same could also be said of some kind of bonus zeppelin that sometimes appears, of some crazy goblins that travel around really fast. And if you got lucky enough to see one of them and lucky enough to get on board, you could get across the continents in a minute or two. Another thing that I think would be interesting, and I think I got this idea from a developer stream for Monsters and Memories some months ago, is that these fast travel routes should pass by interesting and unique areas, so that if a player were to, let's say, jump off halfway through, they could get to that place. and that would either be the only way to get there, like jumping off of a zeppelin on top of a mountain, or just a way to get to somewhere useful fast, like getting into the Stone Talon Mountains from some climbing trail off of the coast. Another thing that I think would be interesting in small amounts would be, I guess, what I would term accidental travel. Let's say there's some huge creature traveling through an area. Well, maybe if you had enough elevation, you could jump on its back and then use that as a method of getting around the map. Or maybe, like when trying to get back to the Asylum in Dark Souls 1, if you hung around some wild eagle's nest in the hinterlands, they would eventually pick you up in their talons and then drop you off somewhere random and possibly even useful depending on where you want to go. And I recognise that I've just spouted off a load of completely different ideas, which when implemented in full force would probably make travel in any video game a mess. And so I think that the idea is to have everything in small doses. If everything is implemented, let's say, only 2 to 3 times, that would make the travel in every individual zone unique. So long as it's relatively intuitive to use, makes sense within the context of that zone, and is reliable travel from one area to another. Okay, so that's me done talking about my favourite bit. Now I'm going to talk about something that also really interests me, mounts. And when talking about mounts, I want to talk about the most interesting thing first, flying mounts. Let's get this out of the way. So when you've got a world this interesting, there is an absolute freedom in flying above it and breaking those rules, and breaking what feels like the rules of gravity and how the game's supposed to work. But when you start breaking the rules of a game, it very quickly stops becoming fun. And so whilst I do think they are something that should definitely be explored, I think it should be very locational. An idea for flying I think I would really like to see is in a zone that looks like, and this is specific, I know, the skybox of Dragon Eyrie in Dark Souls 2, where you can see really far away these huge stacks of stone with plateaus on top. Now, if there was a WoW zone like that that was below some kind of jungle, I think it'd be amazing to be up there and have that zone have flying from stack to stack its primary mode of travel. And then you could of course use this mount to glide down to the jungle below if you needed to head there quickly. Though let's be honest, this isn't very imaginable within the world of vanilla World of Warcraft. But this idea of having a thematic primary mode of transportation in some zones, I think really has a lot behind it. I think that in a primarily aquatic area, there should be a boat that everyone can access that allows you to get around way more efficiently than swimming would. I think that if there's a huge salt flat, for example, which of course there is in World of Warcraft, you should be able to go around on a speeder, like in the Star Wars prequels. And if there's a load of lava, you should be able to head over that lava in some way, like on a little skiff, also like in the Star Wars prequels. But I love this idea that not only is travel very fitting to the area you're in, but also fits into the gameplay of that area too. And it's actually Pirates of the Caribbean Online which inspired me to have this idea, where travelling from one area to another or from one enemy to another is an activity in of itself. And I think another important piece of this mount puzzle is to have the controls for mounts be way better. Mount travel in World of Warcraft is pretty much the same as foot travel in that it's just WASD and jump, I suppose. And there is so much more you could do with that system to add so much more engagement and variety to mounts. What if mounts of all different types, from horses to speeder bikes, had various different stats like acceleration, deceleration, turning speed, some kind of boost or sprint function, a top speed they could reach? What if they had unique jumps or other abilities that could land them in combat? I'm essentially talking about Guild Wars 2 mounts here, right? I don't see a Guild Wars 2 mount control system not working in, well, pretty much any other MMO really that has mounts. And as well as affecting these unique locational mounts for certain zones, this would also affect just your normal mounts. What if, let's say, the different breeds of horses at the Eastvale stables had slightly different stats? And what if the different racial mounts actually had very varying statistics and handled differently? What if, say, the Kodo was really slow and heavy to turn but had very good acceleration, or say the humans' horses could reach impressive top speeds but didn't quite have the stamina of the undead horses, which because they're undead don't have stamina but can't reach those speeds and accelerations that living things can? All of this would create good opportunities for the game to have different kinds of mounts, and also create really good reasons for players to grind the mounts of other races. For example, I think if you're a night elf that wants a dwarf ram, you'll need to grind your Ironforge rep for ages by handing in loads of cloth. And it's not for any real reason. Well, what if it was for a proper reason and there were more interesting ways to increase that rep? Mounts in World of Warcraft are just walking but faster, and they're a great upgrade to your speed, and it's really important, but they're not very fun. They're just a tool, a replacement for walking. And that's the next thing I want to talk about, is that mounts invalidate walking. I think I mentioned earlier that once you have a mount, the only time you're not on it is if you're doing something that you can't do when on a mount, like walk inside a building or gather some herbs. And this doesn't quite feel right. And for this reason, I think terrain should play an important part in the viability of mounts. Now, sure, if you're going across even terrain or along roads, mounts should be way more efficient than walking. It should feel like you're flying. But should a mount get you through the wetlands properly? No. I don't think it should help much in, say, dense jungles or the thick snows of Winterspring either. I think that instead of just being a movement speed increase in all situations, mounts should be a more specific tool which are incredibly powerful in this more specific areas in which they're useful. I also think that class ability should have a bit more involvement with mounts. Now, paladins and warlocks get a free mount at level 40 and have unique long quest lines to get their level 60 mounts, but that's kind of where it ends. I think that maybe a paladin's charger should give a speed buff when other people are mounted up nearby. Now, I believe in the Burning Crusade they did actually add an aura to do that, but I think it should be inherent with charges to make them more interesting. And I think that Warlock mount should do something interesting too. I also think that different classes should also have cool stuff going on in this department. Now, druids do have travel forms that makes them a lot faster than walking in most circumstances, and this is perfect. But as they're not as fast as a full speed level 60 mount, travel forms kind of get invalidated again. I think that being able to turn into some giant cat or bear is one of the most important things about being a druid, and so I do think that they should have parity with mounts. And also, just throwing this in here, I don't know where exactly it would work within the framework of World of Warcraft, but Lightfoot from Nine Dragons should somehow make its way in the game. I don't know how. It's just too awesome not to have some man running around really fast making cool noises. So connecting to when I was talking about terrain earlier, I'd like to talk about the slowest but most foundational and integral part of travel, walking. I think that to an extent at least, walking, just like riding on a mount, should be Guild Wars 2ified, at least to some extent. I think you should feel the terrain you're walking on, and that you're slowed down when trudging through a swamp or a wet area. And most importantly, I think that you should have momentum. I think that you should slow down when trying to climb up a slope and speed up when charging down one. This means that instead of just looking at your map and heading in a straight line auto-walking to your destination, you're having to pay attention to your surroundings and develop your own routes around different areas. Maybe you shouldn't go over the hills and far away. Maybe you should go around the hills and far away. And that's a decision that you can make at that time, which adds a new level of interactability with you and the world. Another thing that I'd really like to see, and this kind of connects to this accidental travel I spoke about earlier, is being able to use the terrain to great advantage in ways like jumping in a river and letting the current take you downstream. Now, I know this is technically a thing. If you get in some of the rivers in the game, it will slowly take you off in that direction. But I think it'd be really cool if you were to drop down that mini waterfall at Caer Darrow. It would slowly empty you out into South Shore. And if you were to swim with the current, it would be even faster. And I think this would also work perfectly with the river system around the human starting areas, where if you drop in that water and go AFK, you will end up in Stranglethorn Bay eventually. But if you wanted to quickly, let's say, get to Goldshire from Lakeshire, you can hop in the water and swim. And this would be a almost secret, efficient, really fast way of traveling from one place to another. Another way of travel is just letting gravity do its thing. There's this really dodgy way to get to the wetlands really quickly from Dunmorrow, where you scale up the side of the mountains and then die in a specific spot so that you are returned to the wetlands graveyard instead. Stuff like that is fun and unique, but I think it should be officially recognised as a way to get around the world. Azeroth is full of mountains, let us climb them. There should be some rare, hard climbing puzzles, much like Guild Wars 2's Vistas, which I sadly forgot to talk about earlier, that if you're perceptive enough to spot them and skilled enough to properly climb them without falling, you can use to very effectively get across those mountains and from one area to the next very quickly. And earlier I very briefly mentioned the idea of dropping from a zeppelin down to a place you couldn't get to from below. And I think that that should be also handled in the terrain as well. Maybe there's some secret routes or caves that you can only find by dropping down from a high place in a specific place. My favourite example in game of all of this climbing stuff is the way to get to the troll village. There's a way to glitch out of the map in Western Winterspring that I did actually show on a previous video that can take you to the hidden troll village in the game. I think stuff like this shouldn't just be a bug, it should be a feature. And these hidden routes don't necessarily have to take you anywhere useful, they just have to take you somewhere interesting. The closest dev-intended example to this in the game is perhaps that hidden pass that connects the hinterlands with the plaguelands. I'd been playing the game for quite a while before I knew that this existed. And though I don't think it's really useful, I can see a world where things like this are useful. One other thing I'd like to talk about is gliding. In retail World of Warcraft, they've had gliders for some years now from my understanding. And though I imagine they'd need to be balanced as a consumable item so that they aren't overused everywhere, the idea that I could climb up some mountain and then quickly get down by gliding, say from the Ironforge airfield down to the wetlands, is great. I think it's the closest you can get to something like flight without completely breaking the conventions of travel. So in conclusion, I think that game designers should pay a lot of attention to the 5 forms of travel I've just talked about, and create an environment where all of them can exist without invalidating the other. Fast travel is great in small doses when it's also enhancing class identity or just being weird. A network of automated travel is necessary in a world this big, and it's a great accommodation for the fact that we have lives and need downtime. The ease of travel that it provides is its advantage, and that's where it should stay. Its trade is speed for ease of use. Public transport is the type with the most potential for the MMO experience as a whole, and I think it should be the recommended mode of travel in places where it would make sense in the game world. As amazing as I think the Deep Run tram is, the entire world on rails wouldn't be great, would it? In order to give the experience of travelling with other people meaning, you also need in the game the experience of trudging through forests alone, lost, to contrast against it. Mounts are an amazing upgrade, and a brilliant status symbol to denote your progression throughout the game. And as amazing as you make a world look, the 30th time through it's just going to be a bit more boring than the first. And so they're an absolute necessity. But they shouldn't replace walking around, which is the foundation of all movement, and should be recognised as such, and be treated with the appropriate amount of detail and dedication befitting a form of travel. Now, many MMOs balance these 5 things in different ways to greater or lesser effect, and some of them just have an entirely different philosophy on how travel should work, like in Pirates of the Caribbean Online. And these suggestions I've made are just opinion, and nobody will completely agree with it. But I do hope I've laid bare how travel in an MMO works, how sometimes it doesn't work, how maybe we can work to make it better, and why it's travel that binds the experience together. I'm not a game designer, I'm just a layman who loves games, and so I hope this video doesn't come across as a lecture from a position of authority or experience, but instead an introduction to a topic I find fascinating, and an invitation to future discussion. Thanks for watching. So I hope you liked the video. The concept behind this video changed several times, even halfway through its production, and so I think maybe it's a bit disjointed, and the conclusion maybe wasn't as complete as it could have been. For example, there's even more stuff I wanted to talk about, like there should be transport based on player philanthropy, so high-level players can easily get around and low-level players can easily connect with them. And though before making this video I never found World of Warcraft's map lacking in any way, now I kind of do. I love the way it looks and functions, but Guild Wars 2's map just makes me feel things that WoW's never did. Oh, and I completely forgot to mention it at the time, but I love that you can interact with stuff in the sky in Wurm. It's really unrelated to travel, but it couldn't go unmentioned. Thanks, Notch. And also, thank you to members Morian, Nightseeker, Patrick Manhora, Lewis H, Lurend, Miffy, Hydroxyl, Edward Russellduck, XPM Dobro Cortez, AC, Sad Scarecrow, Marked as Red, Jerry Freeman, Grad Defouk, Gaming Piper, Emma to the Max, and thank you all for your patience. I was gone for a while, and I'll do a better job at communicating next time. Oh, and in case you didn't know, I stream on Twitch sometimes, and I enjoy it. Link is on the screen. I also have an alt channel where less MMO-centric content goes. Currently there's a video about the Oblivion remaster, which surprisingly performed quite well. Anyway, bye bye.